The wealthy man brought his mistress to the wedding night, with the sole purpose of humiliating his pregnant wife, but as he entered the room, he felt his blood run cold in his veins. Something was about to happen, and he had no idea how to handle what he was about to find. The rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Winston Gallery like impatient fingers, creating a shimmering backdrop to Seattle's most exclusive art opening of the season. The space hummed with the quiet confidence of wealth. Champagne flutes clinked, designer heels clicked against hardwood floors, and hushed conversations about million-dollar acquisitions floated through the air. "I always said you belonged on this side of the exhibition," a voice murmured close to Dahlia Pierce's ear. She turned to find Martin Chen, her former mentor and gallery owner, gesturing toward a striking contemporary painting that commanded attention on the main wall. His silver hair caught the gallery lights as he leaned in conspiratorially. "Not just selling the art," he continued, "creating it, or at least curating your own collection." Dahlia smiled, the expression practiced and perfect, not quite reaching her amber eyes. At 32, she maintained the poise expected of Wesley Hammond's wife, her caramel hair styled in soft waves, her black designer dress accentuating her slender frame, and her smile never betraying the complex emotions beneath. "That was another lifetime, Martin," she replied, unconsciously touching the delicate gold necklace at her throat, a wedding gift from Wesley. "But thank you for remembering." Her gaze drifted across the gallery to where her husband stood holding court with Seattle's elite. At 43, Wesley Hammond cut an imposing figure, 6'2" with salt and pepper hair that only enhanced his authority. The tailored charcoal suit he wore probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but that was Wesley, a man who believed appearance was everything. Hammond Developments had transformed Seattle's skyline over the past decade, and Wesley had transformed his father's respectable real estate company into an empire. Everyone in the room knew it. He made sure of it. "He still doesn't know what he has in you," Martin said, following her gaze. Dahlia took a sip of sparkling water, no alcohol tonight, and deflected. "How's the new exhibition coming along? I heard you landed Yamazaki for the spring." Martin allowed the change of subject with a knowing look. "You still keep tabs on the art world. Interesting. Some habits are hard to break." 2 years ago, Dahlia had been the rising star of Seattle's contemporary art scene. As head curator at the prestigious Elliott Gallery, she discovered several breakthrough artists and had just secured her first international exhibition. Then she'd married Wesley Hammond. The pressure had been subtle at first. "I miss you when you're working late." Then, "These industry parties are important for our future." And finally, "My wife shouldn't have to work. What would people think of me?" Each comment delivered with Wesley's signature smile that didn't quite reach his glacier blue eyes. A waiter approached with another tray of champagne. Dahlia waved him off, her hand unconsciously drifting to her still flat stomach. 6 weeks along, their little secret for now. Well, hers and Wesley's and Dr. Sanjay's. "Are you feeling all right?" Martin asked, noticing the gesture. "Just tired." She smiled more genuinely this time. "End of winter blues, probably." Across the room, Wesley finally looked her way, a subtle signal that it was time to join him. Duty called. "Excuse me, Martin. Wonderful seeing you again." As Dahlia crossed the gallery floor, she noticed a striking redhead in a deep emerald dress lean in to whisper something in Wesley's ear. He laughed, a genuine laugh, his head tilting back slightly in a way Dahlia hadn't seen in months. "Ah, here she is," Wesley announced as Dahlia approached, his hand immediately finding the small of her back in a gesture of possessiveness rather than affection. "Senator Williams was just asking about the charity gala next month. We're looking forward to it," Dahlia replied automatically, extending her hand to the silver-haired politician. "And this is Brooke Mercer," Wesley continued, gesturing to the redhead. "My new executive assistant. She's been revolutionary for the office in just 3 months." Brooke's handshake was firm, her smile professional, but Dahlia didn't miss how the woman's green eyes lingered on Wesley a beat too long. "Dahlia Pierce Hammond," she introduced herself, emphasizing her hyphenated surname, something she knew irritated Wesley in public. "Lovely to meet you." "The pleasure's mine. Wesley talks about you constantly," Brooke replied, her voice smooth as honey. "He mentioned you used to be quite the force in the art world." "Used to be." The words stung more than they should. "Dahlia prefers to focus on our charitable foundation now," Wesley interjected before she could respond. "Speaking of which, Brooks, Did you confirm the venue for next week's board meeting? Already handled. The Collins Room at the Four Seasons, 3 p.m. Tuesday. I've prepared all the projections you requested and scheduled the call with the Singapore investors for 7 a.m. that morning. Wesley's approving nod sent an uncomfortable pang through Dahlia's chest. When was the last time he'd looked at her with that kind of appreciation? If you'll excuse us, Wesley said to the group, his hand still firmly on Dahlia's back. I see the Richardsons just arrived. Critical moment for that downtown development. As they navigated through the crowd, Dahlia felt Wesley's grip tighten slightly. You're quiet tonight, he observed, not looking at her as they walked. Just observing. That's my job at these functions, isn't it? To observe and support. Wesley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't start, Dahlia, not here. I wasn't starting anything, she replied softly. I was answering your question. Before he could respond, they reached the Richardsons, a power couple whose shipping fortune made them potential investors in Wesley's new waterfront development. The mask slipped back into place, and the perfect couple performance resumed. 3 exhausting hours later, rain still falling steadily outside, Wesley guided their Tesla through Seattle's glistening streets. The Space Needle glowed in the distance, its reflection wavering in the wet pavement as they drove in silence toward their Belltown penthouse. The Miller account is secured, Wesley finally said, breaking the silence. $20 million in funding for the South Lake Union project. Tonight was productive. Dahlia stared out at the rain-streaked window. Congratulations. Your conversation with his wife helped. She mentioned you were delightful. His tone suggested this was high praise, a job well done. Dahlia took a deep breath. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, when Wesley was satisfied with business, pleased with their public performance. Perhaps now was the time to really discuss the pregnancy. Wesley, about the baby. His phone chimed with a text notification, cutting her off. Wesley glanced down at the screen, and Dahlia caught a flash of a name. Brooke. Sorry, this might be important, he said, picking up the phone and scanning the message. Something shifted in his expression, so subtle most would miss it, but Dahlia had spent 2 years studying the micro-expressions of this man, the slight softening around his eyes, the faint upturn at the corner of his mouth. Everything okay? She asked. Just work, he replied, setting the phone down without responding to the message. What were you saying about the baby? The moment had passed, taking Dahlia's courage with it. Nothing important, just thinking we should start planning the nursery soon. Wesley nodded absently, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. I'll have my assistant research some interior designers, someone who specializes in nurseries for clients like us. His assistant. Not Brooke, but his assistant, as if creating distance in his language could mask whatever had just passed across his face when he'd read her message. When they arrived home, the penthouse welcomed them with programmed warmth, lights automatically dimming to evening mode, the gas fireplace igniting as they entered the living room with its panoramic view of Elliott Bay. Everything sleek, modern, and impeccably designed. A perfect showcase home for a power couple. I'm going to shower, Wesley announced, already loosening his tie as he headed toward the master suite. Dahlia nodded, kicking off her heels and padding to the kitchen. She filled a glass with water and leaned against the marble countertop, closing her eyes for a moment. The quiet of the apartment pressed in around her. No roommates like she'd had during her gallery days. No colleagues calling with exciting news about upcoming exhibitions. No artist friends dropping by with bottles of wine and passionate debates about the meaning of life. Just silence and perfection, and the growing certainty that something was wrong with her marriage. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A text from her brother, Mason. How was the fancy art party? Still miss you at our Sunday brunches. The diner isn't the same without you analyzing all the bad artwork on the walls. She smiled, feeling a pang of homesickness for her old life. Mason was the only one who still treated her like Dahlia the person, not Dahlia the Hammond accessory. It was fine, she typed back. Ran into Martin. He still thinks I should be running my own gallery. Mason's response came quickly. He's right. You're wasting your talent playing trophy wife. The words stung because they echoed her own thoughts on her darkest days. Not just a trophy wife anymore. Going to be a mother soon, she replied, allowing herself a moment of joy about the pregnancy. When were you going to tell me? That's amazing, sis. How far along? 6 weeks. Don't tell anyone yet. Not even Mom. Secret safe. Congrats. This changes everything, doesn't it? Dahlia stared at the message. Does it? She wondered. Would a baby truly change anything, or would it just trap her more firmly in this beautiful empty life? The sound of the shower running drifted from the master suite. Wesley would be at least 20 minutes. His nightly routine was precise and unvarying. She set down her water and walked to the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass, Seattle's lights blurring into watercolor smudges beyond. She'd married Wesley believing he just needed someone to draw him out of his shell, to show him there was more to life than acquisition and achievement. 2 years later, she was the one who had changed, becoming quieter, more cautious, always weighing her words against his potential reactions. The shower stopped. Dahlia moved away from the window, preparing to resume her role in their carefully choreographed evening routine. As she passed the entryway, she noticed Wesley's phone on the console table where he'd placed it while hanging up his coat. The screen lit up with another notification. She shouldn't look. It wasn't who they were as a couple. They respected each other's privacy, maintained appropriate boundaries, but something about Brooke's smile at the gallery, the way Wesley had laughed with his head thrown back, a laugh Dahlia hadn't heard directed at her in months, made her steps slow, then stop. One glance, just to quiet her growing unease. The notification preview was brief but unmistakable. Brooke Mercer. Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow? The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath Dahlia's feet. She heard Wesley exit the bathroom, his footsteps moving around their bedroom. She stepped away from the phone, heart pounding, and moved toward the bedroom on autopilot. Her mind raced through possibilities. A late work meeting, a business dinner, an innocent explanation, but none of them explained the flush in Wesley's face when he'd read her earlier message, or the way Brooke had looked at him at the gallery. Dahlia paused at the bedroom doorway, watching as Wesley, now in silk pajama bottoms, typed something on his laptop. "Wesley," she said softly, "I was thinking, maybe we should do something special to mark this new chapter in our lives." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What did you have in mind?" The words came to her suddenly, a test perhaps, or a lifeline. A vow renewal, something intimate but meaningful, to recommit to each other before the baby comes. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else. Calculation. He closed his laptop slowly. A vow renewal? After only 2 years of marriage? Not because anything's wrong, she added quickly, watching his reaction carefully, but because everything's about to change, in a good way. I thought it might be nice to reaffirm what we mean to each other before we become 3 instead of 2. Wesley was silent for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Finally, he smiled, that perfect public smile that never quite reached his eyes. "If that would make you happy, then of course. We'll renew our vows." "Really?" The easy agreement surprised her. "Really?" He reopened his laptop. "When were you thinking?" "Soon. Before I start showing. Maybe in a month." He nodded, already returning his attention to the screen. "Have Margot coordinate with my assistant on the details." His assistant, not Brooke. Never Brooke, when speaking to Dahlia. "I will," she said, turning toward the bathroom to begin her own nightly routine. Behind her, Wesley's phone chimed again from the entryway. She heard him pause his typing, listening. After a moment, he said casually, "Would you mind bringing my phone? I'm expecting an email from the Tokyo investors." Dahlia's hand froze on the bathroom doorknob. "Sure," she replied, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She retrieved the phone, careful not to look at the screen, and placed it on the nightstand beside him. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, a touch that once would have sparked something between them, but now felt as empty as the smile he gave her. "Thank you," he said, immediately checking the notification. Dahlia slipped into the bathroom and closed the door. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, the perfect hair now slightly mussed, the designer dress now slightly wrinkled, the practiced smile now completely absent. Her hand drifted to her stomach. "It's just you and me, little one," she whispered to her unborn child. "But I'm going to fix this. Somehow." In the bedroom, Wesley Hammond typed a response to Brooke's latest message. "Can't tomorrow, need to discuss something important. Lunch at the usual place, 1 p.m. Then, calculating as always, he added, "Dahlia wants to renew our vows. Might be perfect timing for our situation." He hit send, then deleted the message thread entirely before setting his phone aside. Beyond the bathroom door, he could hear the water running as Dahlia began her shower. Wesley smiled to himself. a genuine expression that transformed his handsome face into something harder, colder. A vow renewal. It couldn't have been more perfect if he'd planned it himself. "It's getting risky," Brooke said, her voice barely above a whisper as she traced her fingernails down Wesley's bare chest. The afternoon light filtered through the blinds of the downtown hotel suite, casting striped shadows across the rumpled sheets. "That text I sent last night was deleted immediately," Wesley finished, checking his watch. "Besides, Dahlia suspects nothing. She's too wrapped up in baby plans and this ridiculous vow renewal idea." Brooke propped herself up on one elbow, her red hair spilling over her shoulders. "Vow renewal? You can't be serious. Her idea, not mine." Wesley's laugh was cold, but potentially useful. "How so?" He sat up, reaching for his shirt. "The timing couldn't be better. If we're careful, it creates the perfect opportunity." Brooke's eyes narrowed with understanding. "You mean I need out before the Wilson deal collapses completely," Wesley said, his voice hardening as he buttoned his shirt. "The SEC is already asking questions about the South Lake Union financing. If Dahlia and I are still married when it all comes crashing down, she'd be entitled to half of everything," Brooke finished. "Exactly. And while half of everything sounds fine now, half of nothing, or worse, half of my debt is unacceptable." He checked his reflection in the mirror, adjusting his tie. "I need to control how this ends." Brooke slid out of bed, unabashedly naked as she walked to where he stood. "And where do I fit into this plan of yours?" Wesley turned, his eyes traveling down her body appreciatively. "Right where you've always been, by my side, helping me rebuild once this is over." He pulled her close. "Hammond Developments will survive this temporary setback, and when it does, we won't have to meet in hotel rooms anymore." Brooke smiled against his mouth as he kissed her. "So, what's the plan for this vow renewal?" "I'm still working out the details," he replied, "but it involves giving Dahlia exactly what she thinks she wants, and then taking it all away in the most devastating way possible." "Sounds cruel even for you," Brooke observed, though her tone suggested admiration rather than judgment. "Necessary," he corrected. "I need her to file for divorce in a state of emotional distress. She'll be more likely to accept a quick settlement, something that protects my assets before the investigation becomes public. And the baby?" Something flickered behind Wesley's eyes, not quite regret, but perhaps a momentary recognition of lines being crossed. A complication, but not insurmountable. Dahlia sat in the waiting room of Dr. Sanjay's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The slight spotting this morning had sent a wave of panic through her that hadn't subsided even after the nurse assured her it could be normal. "Mrs. Hammond," the nurse appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Sanjay will see you now." Dahlia followed her down the hallway, checking her phone one more time. No response from Wesley. She had left 3 messages. The first casual, just informing him of the appointment. The second increasingly worried after the spotting started. And the third from the doctor's parking lot, her voice tight with unshed tears. Dr. Sanjay's kind face showed concern as she entered. "Dahlia, how are you feeling now?" "Scared," she admitted. "Is everything okay?" The doctor gestured for her to sit. "Your HCG levels are still rising appropriately, which is good news. The ultrasound showed a strong heartbeat, but I am concerned about your blood pressure. It's quite elevated. Is that dangerous for the baby?" "It can be, if it persists. I'd like to discuss some stress management techniques and possibly consider medication if things don't improve." Dr. Sanjay studied her face. "What's been going on in your life recently? Any significant stressors?" Dahlia laughed hollowly. "Other than suspecting my husband might be having an affair while I'm pregnant with his child, nothing much." Dr. Sanjay's expression remained professionally neutral. "I see. And have you discussed these concerns with him?" "Not yet," Dahlia admitted. "We're planning a vow renewal ceremony next month. I thought maybe—" She trailed off, realizing how naive it sounded. "You thought it might bring you closer." Dahlia nodded, embarrassed. "Dahlia, Doctor, Sanjay said gently, "I'm your doctor, not a marriage counselor. But as someone concerned with your health and your baby's health, I need to be direct. Emotional stress can have very real physical consequences during pregnancy. Whatever's happening in your marriage needs to be addressed one way or another." The doctor's words stayed with Dahlia as she left the clinic, stepping out into Seattle's perpetual spring drizzle. She opened her umbrella mechanically, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Her phone rang. Mason, not Wesley. "Hey," she answered, trying to sound normal. You okay? You sound off. Mason had always been able to read her, even without seeing her face. It was what made him such an effective detective. Just tired. Doctor's appointment ran long. Everything all right with the little nugget? Dahlia smiled at his nickname for the baby. Doctor says the heartbeat is strong. My blood pressure's a bit high, though. Wesley stressing you out again? The edge in Mason's voice was unmistakable. Mason, don't start. I'm just saying, ever since you married him, I know what you're just saying, she interrupted. You've been just saying it for 2 years. A pause. Sorry, sis. Not trying to make things harder. How about I make it up to you? Coffee at Elm Street Bakery. They still have those ridiculous maple scones you like. The thought of her old neighborhood haunt brought an immediate pang of nostalgia. Can't today, meeting with the event planner for the vow renewal. Vow renewal? After 2 years? Is that even a thing? It is now, she replied, hearing the defensiveness in her voice. It's important to me, Mason. Another pause. Okay, I'm here if you need anything. Literally anything, anytime. After hanging up, Dahlia checked her messages again. Still nothing from Wesley. She sent a simple text. Baby is fine. Doctor says I need to reduce stress. Meeting Vivian about the ceremony at 2. The response came almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting for a different message to end before responding to hers. Good news. Tied up in meetings all afternoon. You handle the details. No question about her health, no offer to join her, no acknowledgement of her earlier worried messages. Just permission to proceed with planning the ceremony he clearly had no interest in. Dahlia pocketed her phone and straightened her shoulders. If Wesley wouldn't fight for their marriage, she would have to do it for both of them, for all 3 of them. Mason Pierce stared at the financial reports spread across his desk, a deep frown etching lines into his forehead. What had started as casual research into his brother-in-law's business dealings had evolved into something much more concerning over the past week. Are you still obsessing over Hammond? Detective Alvarez asked, setting a coffee on Mason's desk. Something's not right with the South Lake Union project, Mason replied, not looking up. Look at these investment figures versus the reported construction costs. Alvarez leaned over his shoulder. Pretty big discrepancy. About $30 million worth of discrepancy, and that's just what I can see from publicly available documents. This isn't department business, Pierce. This is your personal vendetta against your sister's husband. Mason finally looked up. It's not personal. Well, not entirely. Hammond Developments is partnering with the city on the new police headquarters expansion. If they're cooking the books on other projects, then it becomes department business, Alvarez conceded, but treading carefully would be wise. Hammond has friends in high places. So do I, Mason replied, gathering the documents into a folder. Starting with a contact at the SEC who owes me a favor. As Alvarez walked away, Mason pulled out his phone and sent a text to his sister. Free for dinner this weekend. Been too long since we really talked. It was time to find out exactly what was happening in Dahlia's seemingly perfect life. I'm thinking intimate but elegant, Vivian Reynolds, Seattle's most sought-after event planner, explained as she showed Dahlia photographs on her tablet. The Olympic Sculpture Park gives us that quintessential Seattle backdrop, the sound, the mountains, the city skyline, while keeping the guest list manageable at 60. Dahlia nodded, trying to focus on the images of floral arrangements and table settings. The Four Seasons meeting room felt overly air-conditioned, or perhaps it was just her perpetual chill these days. And for the reception after the ceremony, we've secured the Rainier Club's heritage room. Old Seattle elegance, very exclusive. It sounds perfect, Dahlia said, smiling wanly. Wesley will appreciate the prestige. Vivian's professional demeanor slipped momentarily. And what would you appreciate, Mrs. Hammond? The question caught Dahlia off guard. I'm sorry. In my experience, renewal ceremonies are deeply personal, more so than the original wedding, which often involves family expectations and traditions. This is about what the 2 of you want to say to each other now. Vivian set down her tablet. So what message do you want this day to convey? Dahlia stared out the window at Seattle's skyline, steel and glass towers reaching into the cloudy sky, Wesley's Hammond Tower prominent among them. I want it to remind us of what we promised each other, she said quietly. Before life got complicated, before... She rested her hand on her still flat stomach. Understanding dawned in Vivian's eyes. Congratulations, she said warmly. That puts a beautiful spin on the renewal. Not just recommitting to each other, but committing to your new family. Dahlia nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. Exactly. That's exactly it. Well then, Vivian said, returning to business mode but with a softer edge, I think we need to personalize this more than we initially discussed. Custom vows, perhaps. Something that speaks to this new chapter. I'd like that, Dahlia agreed. Though I'm not sure Wesley will want to... Let me worry about Mr. Hammond, Vivian interrupted with a conspiratorial smile. In 15 years of planning events for Seattle's elite, I've never met the man I couldn't convince to deliver heartfelt vows when properly motivated. For the first time in weeks, Dahlia felt a genuine spark of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe they could find their way back to each other. The Wilson deal is officially dead, Richard Kwan, Hammond Development's CFO, announced grimly as he closed the conference room door. And our exposure is significant. Wesley's face remained impassive as he scanned the financial report Richard had placed before him. Inside, however, a cold panic was spreading through his chest. How bad? Worst case? We're looking at a $40 million loss. Best case, with some creative accounting, and if we can find new investors quickly, maybe half that. And the SEC inquiry. Richard adjusted his glasses nervously. They've requested additional documentation on the South Lake Union financing. Specifically, they're interested in the offshore accounts. Which offshore accounts? Wesley asked sharply. The Cayman structure. The one you insisted wouldn't be traceable. Wesley stood abruptly, walking to the window of his office that overlooked the Seattle harbor. Container ships moved slowly across the water, methodically unloading their cargo, much like the SEC would soon be unloading his carefully constructed financial facade. How long do we have before it becomes public? 2 months, maybe 3 if we're lucky, and our legal team earns their exorbitant retainer. Richard hesitated. Wesley, if you have personal assets you want to protect. I'm aware of the implications, Richard. Wesley cut him off. Send me the complete exposure analysis by end of day, and not through company email. After Richard left, Wesley remained at the window, his mind calculating possibilities, escape routes, contingency plans. His empire was built on leverage, each success enabling the next larger acquisition. But leverage worked both ways. When it collapsed, it could crush everything beneath it, including his marriage to Dahlia with its lack of a prenuptial agreement. A terrible oversight he had made when marrying the seemingly naive art curator who he'd assumed would be grateful for his financial security. He hadn't anticipated that Washington's community property laws would entitle her to half of everything, including, potentially, half of his mounting debt. His phone chimed with a text from Brooke. Just ran into your wife with the event planner. She's going all out for this renewal ceremony. It's almost sad. Wesley smiled grimly. Keep tabs on the preparations. I'm finalizing our plan. He pulled up his calendar, examining the dates. The vow renewal was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from now, well before the SEC investigation would become public knowledge. Perfect timing, if he could execute correctly. He pulled up another contact on his phone. Gregory Walsh, his attorney. Need to discuss post-nuptial agreement options. Discreetly. Dinner tonight? The response came quickly, concerning timing. Post-nuptials during pregnancy, highly scrutinized by courts. Let's discuss alternatives. Wesley's jaw tightened. Of course it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Hammond, your wife is here to see you. Wesley quickly closed the financial reports on his computer. Send her in. Dahlia entered, looking more animated than he'd seen her in weeks. The pale blue dress she wore accentuated her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, Wesley remembered why he'd been attracted to her initially. Her quiet elegance, her genuine passion for beauty and art, so different from the calculated ambition of women like Brooke. This is a surprise, he said, coming around his desk to kiss her cheek perfunctorily. I was meeting with Vivian nearby and thought I'd stop by. She glanced around his office. I haven't been here in months. Been busy, he replied vaguely. How was your doctor's appointment? Everything okay? The baby's fine, she said, studying his face. Doctor's concerned about my blood pressure, though. Says I need to reduce stress. Sounds sensible. Perhaps cut back on the renewal planning? We could simplify. Actually, she interrupted, the planning is the one thing keeping me positive right now, Wesley. There was a new firmness in her voice. I've been thinking about what this ceremony means to me. To us. Wesley gestured for her to sit on the sleek leather sofa against the wall. Oh? It's not just about recommitting to our marriage, it's about committing to our future. As a family, she placed a hand on her stomach. I think we should write our own vows. Something that reflects where we are now, not where we were 2 years ago. Wesley controlled his expression carefully. Personal vows would make what he was planning even more devastating. If that's what you want, it is. She hesitated, then added, I also thought, maybe after the ceremony we could take a few days, just the two of us. The doctor said a baby moon would be good before I get too far along. A private getaway would complicate his plans considerably. Let's see how the Hammond Tower project timeline looks closer to the date, he hedged. Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. Of course, work comes first. The words weren't accusatory, which somehow made them worse. She had simply accepted his prioritization of business over their marriage as an immutable fact. Dahlia, he began, not entirely sure what he intended to say. His office door opened without a knock, and Brooke walked in carrying a stack of folders. She faltered slightly upon seeing Dahlia, then recovered with a professional smile. I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Hammond. I didn't realize you had a visitor. Not a visitor, Dahlia corrected quietly. His wife. Of course, Mrs. Hammond. My apologies. Brooke's smile remained fixed. I can come back later with these contract revisions. No need, Wesley said quickly. Dahlia was just leaving. Weren't you, dear? Something shifted in Dahlia's expression, a subtle hardening around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Yes, she said, standing. I have a dinner to get to anyway. Dinner? Wesley asked, his tone deliberately casual. With whom? Mason. We haven't had sibling time in weeks. She collected her purse. Don't wait up if you're working late again. After she left, Brooke set the folders on his desk. She suspects something. She suspects but doesn't know, Wesley corrected. And it doesn't matter. In 3 weeks, it'll all be over. Your attorney texted while you were talking to her, said he'll meet you at the Metropolitan Grill at 7. Brooke perched on the edge of his desk. Plan B? Something like that. He reached for her hand, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. This is going to work, Brooke. By the time the SEC investigation becomes public, I'll have protected what matters. And what matters, Wesley? She asked, her green eyes holding his. Success. Survival. He pulled her closer. You. Brooke smiled, satisfied with his answer. So what exactly are you planning for this renewal ceremony? You've been mysterious about the details. Wesley's expression darkened with purpose. I'm planning to give Dahlia exactly what she wants. A perfect romantic recommitment ceremony, followed by the most humiliating night of her life. The presidential suite at the Four Seasons is booked for after the reception, Brooke said, understanding dawning in her eyes. You want me to be there. Not just there, Wesley clarified, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the privacy of his office. I want you to help me destroy any illusion she has about our marriage. Make it so devastating that she'll agree to any divorce terms just to escape the humiliation. That's cold even for you, Brooke observed, though her tone suggested admiration rather than judgment. It's necessary, Wesley replied. The SEC investigation will become public within weeks after the ceremony. I need this settled before then. And the baby? Wesley's jaw tightened. A complication I didn't anticipate, but I'll provide financially, of course. I'm not a monster. Brooke laughed softly. Debatable, but it's what I like about you. She leaned in to kiss him. So, the wedding night becomes divorce night. Poetic, in a cruel sort of way. Everything must appear perfect until that moment, Wesley emphasized. I need witnesses who will testify to how happy we seemed, how invested I was in the renewal. It protects me legally when she falls apart afterward. Speaking of protection, Brooke said, straightening up and smoothing her skirt, have you considered what happens if this doesn't work? If she fights back? Wesley's confidence never wavered. Dahlia, fight back. He shook his head dismissively. She gave up her career for me. She tolerates my late nights at the office without question. She's planning a vow renewal ceremony, even though I can barely stand to be in the same room with her. He gestured toward the door Dahlia had just exited through. Does that strike you as someone capable of fighting back? Brooke considered this, then nodded slowly. When you put it that way, she does seem perfectly set up for heartbreak. Exactly. 3 weeks from now, after the ceremony, you and I will meet in that suite, and when Dahlia arrives expecting a romantic night, Wesley's smile was cold with anticipation. That's when we'll spring the trap. By morning, she'll be begging for a quick, quiet divorce on my terms. As Brooke left his office, Wesley turned back to the financial reports waiting on his computer, numbers that spelled disaster if he couldn't extract himself from his marriage before they became public. A ticking clock that made even his coldest calculations seem necessary. What he failed to notice was the small digital recorder Dahlia had left in her haste, or perhaps intentionally, tucked between the sofa cushions, its tiny red light blinking steadily in the gathering shadows of his office. Seattle had given them a rare, perfect day. The Olympic Sculpture Park gleamed under clear skies, the waters of Puget Sound sparkling sapphire blue beyond. Snow-capped Olympic mountains provided a majestic backdrop as 60 guests gathered in white chairs, arranged in a semicircle around a simple floral arch. Dahlia stood in a small tent at the edge of the park, taking deep breaths as her makeup artist applied a final touch of blush. The ivory sheath dress she'd chosen hugged her figure gently, revealing the slight curve of her 12-week pregnancy. "So you look beautiful," Vivian said, making final adjustments to Dahlia's loose updo, where sprigs of baby's breath were interwoven with her caramel hair. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous," Dahlia admitted, "but hopeful." Hopeful, the word that had sustained her through 3 weeks of meticulous planning, while Wesley grew increasingly distant. Hopeful despite the recorder she'd left in his office and retrieved the next day, its contents still unheard. It sat now in her vanity drawer at home, an insurance policy she prayed she wouldn't need to use. "Your husband just arrived," Vivian's assistant announced, peeking into the tent. "Guests are all seated." Dahlia nodded, reaching for the folded paper containing her vows, words she'd rewritten a dozen times, searching for the perfect combination that might bridge the growing chasm between them. "It's time," Vivian said gently. As Dahlia emerged from the tent, the string quartet began playing. She paused, taking in the scene before her. Their closest friends, Wesley's business associates, her brother Mason sitting stoically in the front row. And at the end of the white runner strewn with rose petals stood Wesley, impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, watching her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe this could work, that they could start again, that the man waiting for her was the same one who'd once convinced her he couldn't live without her. Wesley Hammond adjusted his platinum cufflinks, a gift from Brooke, as he watched Dahlia approach. He had to admit she looked stunning. Pregnancy had given her skin a luminous quality, and the simple elegance of her dress reminded him of what had first attracted him to her. A momentary pang of something like regret flickered through him, quickly suppressed. He was aware of Mason Pierce's hard stare from the front row. Dahlia's detective brother had never bothered to hide his dislike, and lately the man's scrutiny had intensified. A complication, but not one that concerned him overly much. By tomorrow, nothing would matter except executing his exit strategy. As Dahlia reached him, Wesley took her hands in his, the practiced public smile firmly in place. Her fingers trembled slightly in his grasp. Vulnerable, trusting, despite everything. It made what he was about to do easier and more difficult simultaneously. The officiant, a silver-haired judge who'd been Wesley's father's golf partner, began speaking about commitment and growth and new beginnings. Wesley barely heard the words, his mind already in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, where everything would end tonight. "And now," the judge announced, "Dahlia and Wesley have prepared their own vows to recommit to their journey together." Dahlia unfolded her paper with slightly shaking hands. When she looked up at him, her amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Wesley," she began, her voice clear, despite her obvious emotion. "2 years ago, I promised to love you in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer until death parted us. Today I make a new promise, to love you through change, through challenge, through the unexpected turns life brings us." She placed a hand briefly on her stomach. "When I met you, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. You showed me a different world, a different life. Some of that was wonderful. Some was harder than I expected." A ripple of uncomfortable awareness passed through the guests. This wasn't the bland, pleasant renewal speech they'd anticipated. "I stand here today choosing us. Not the perfect image we show the world, but the real, complicated, sometimes messy us. I choose to fight for what we could be. I choose to believe that what brought us together is stronger than what has pulled us apart." Her voice caught slightly. "I choose to trust that the father of our child is the man I believed in 2 years ago. The man I still believe in, despite everything." Wesley felt coldness spreading through his chest, despite everything. What exactly did she know? Mason Pierce shifted in his seat, the manila envelope beneath his jacket growing heavier with each word of his sister's raw, honest vows. The securities fraud investigation had accelerated dramatically in the past 48 hours. What had begun as his personal inquiry had transformed into a full federal case when the SEC discovered the extent of the Hammond Development's financial shell game. He glanced at his watch. The FBI agents were waiting for his signal, a text that would bring them to the Rainier Club reception. But seeing Dahlia so vulnerable, so publicly committed to salvaging her marriage, made him hesitate. Perhaps it would be kinder to wait until tomorrow, to let her have this one night of hope before her world collapsed. His phone vibrated silently in his pocket. A text from Agent Lerner, Hammond's CFO, talking. "Need to move tonight. Your call on timing." Mason looked up as Wesley began his vows, his smooth, practiced voice carrying across the sculpture garden. "Dahlia," Wesley began, his voice perfectly modulated to project sincerity. "When we met, I saw something in you that I'd never found before. A genuine appreciation for beauty, for meaning beyond material success." He watched her eyes soften and knew his calculated words were having the desired effect. This was what Dahlia wanted to hear. Acknowledgement of her influence on him, validation of her sacrifice in giving up her career. "These past 2 years have changed us both," he continued. "And now we face the greatest change of all." He placed his hand gently over hers on her stomach, aware of the photographer capturing the moment. "I stand here today reaffirming my commitment to you and to our child, to creating a future built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect." The irony of his words wasn't lost on him. In less than 6 hours he would destroy everything he was promising, but the witnesses would remember this moment. Wesley Hammond, devoted husband, publicly committing to his pregnant wife. It would serve him well when the divorce proceedings began. "Whatever challenges come our way," he concluded, "we will face them together. This I vow to you, today and always." As he slipped the new diamond eternity band onto her finger, an extravagant gesture that had been Brooke's idea, ironically, Wesley saw tears spill onto Dahlia's cheeks. The judge pronounced them renewed in their commitment, and the guests erupted in applause as Wesley leaned in to kiss her. For one disconcerting moment as their lips met, he was transported back to their first kiss, her genuine passion, her unhesitating trust. A fleeting sense of loss swept through him, immediately buried under the weight of necessity. Sentimentality was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the SEC closing in. The Rainier Club reception glittered with old Seattle money and new tech wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the heritage room's oak-paneled walls as waiters circulated with champagne and Northwest-inspired canapes. Dahlia accepted congratulations from guests, Wesley's hand resting possessively at the small of her back. His touch, once comforting, now felt like a brand, hot and confining. His vows had been perfect, exactly what she'd hoped to hear. Too perfect, perhaps. The practiced cadence, the careful word choice. It felt like one of his business presentations, meticulously crafted for maximum impact. She excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment alone. Once inside the elegant powder room, she leaned against the marble counter, examining her reflection. The hopeful bride staring back at her seemed like a stranger. The door opened and Vivian slipped in. "Everything okay? You seemed overwhelmed out there." "Just emotional," Dahlia managed. "Pregnancy hormones." Vivian's experienced eyes missed nothing. And, Dahlia hesitated. "Did his vows seem rehearsed to you? Like he was performing?" The event planner's hesitation was answer enough. "Wesley is a public figure. He's accustomed to speaking for effect. That's a diplomatic way of saying yes," Dahlia observed with a sad smile. "The car will be ready at 9 to take you both to the Four Seasons," Vivian said, changing the subject. "I've personally overseen the suite preparations. It's absolutely stunning. Thank you." Dahlia touched up her lipstick, armoring herself to return to the reception. "For everything." As she re-entered the heritage room, she spotted Mason in deep conversation with Wesley, both men looking tense despite their social smiles. She moved toward them, catching the tail end of their exchange. "Just making conversation," Mason was saying. "Financial regulations must keep you busy these days." "Always," Wesley replied smoothly. "But tonight isn't about business, is it, Mason? It's about family." He emphasized the word slightly, a subtle reminder that they were at least legally related. Absolutely, Mason agreed, his smile not reaching his eyes. He turned to Dahlia, his expression softening. There's my beautiful sister. Can I steal you for a dance? On the dance floor, Mason held her carefully, as if she might break. You okay, doll? Fine, she replied automatically. Why wouldn't I be? I don't know, maybe because your husband looks at you like you're a merger he's negotiating instead of a wife he loves. Mason, she warned, not tonight. He sighed. I'm sorry. I worry about you. I know. She rested her head briefly on his shoulder. But I have to try, Mason. For the baby, if nothing else. And if trying isn't enough? If he's not who you need him to be? Dahlia pulled back slightly to meet her brother's gaze. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I have to give us this chance. Mason nodded, though the concern in his eyes didn't diminish. Just remember you're not alone, doll. Whatever happens, you have me, always. The cryptic intensity of his words unsettled her, but before she could question him further, Wesley appeared at their side. Mind if I cut in? He asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. As Mason relinquished her to Wesley's arms, he gave her hand a final reassuring squeeze. Watching him walk away, Dahlia had the unsettling feeling that her brother knew something she didn't. At precisely 9 o'clock, Dahlia and Wesley slipped away from the reception, the guests showering them with lavender as they rushed to the waiting car. Inside the luxury sedan, Dahlia finally felt the tension of the day begin to ease. It was beautiful, she said, reaching for Wesley's hand. Everything. Your vows, especially. Glad you approved, he replied, checking something on his phone. Did you mean them? The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Wesley looked up, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the car. Of course, why would you ask that? Because you've barely looked at me in weeks. Because you've been working later and later. Because... She stopped herself before mentioning Brooke's name or the suspicious text messages she'd glimpsed. Because, he prompted. Nothing. She turned to look out the window as they approached the illuminated entrance of the Four Seasons. Tonight is supposed to be a new beginning. Let's not start it with old doubts. He squeezed her hand, the gesture as calculated as everything else he did. Wise decision. The presidential suite took up half of the hotel's top floor, offering panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains, now silhouetted against the sunset. Rose petals formed a path from the door to the bedroom, where champagne chilled in an ice bucket, beside a platter of chocolate-covered strawberries. Vivian outdid herself, Dahlia commented, taking in the romantic scene. She certainly did. Wesley loosened his tie, pouring himself a generous glass of champagne. He didn't offer her any, knowing she couldn't drink. Another small but telling oversight. Dahlia slipped off her heels, curling her toes into the plush carpet. I think I'll take a quick shower, freshen up a bit. Wesley nodded absently, his attention already back on his phone. Take your time. In the marble bathroom, Dahlia slowly removed her jewelry, then unpinned her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. The woman in the mirror looked exhausted beneath the perfect makeup, the strain of hoping, of pretending, of ignoring what she increasingly suspected had taken its toll. She turned on the shower, letting steam fill the room as she unzipped her dress. Her hand passed over the small bump of her stomach, and she whispered a silent promise to her child. Whatever happens, you'll be loved, so loved. When she emerged 15 minutes later, wrapped in a hotel robe with her hair damp around her shoulders, the suite was silent. Wesley, she called, padding back into the bedroom. What she saw there stopped her cold. Wesley stood by the window, still in his suit pants but with his shirt half unbuttoned, and perched on the edge of the king-sized bed, champagne flute in hand, sat Brooke Mercer. Her emerald green dress, the same color she'd worn the night Dahlia first met her, was hiked up slightly, revealing crossed legs that ended in stiletto heels. What is this? Dahlia asked, her voice surprisingly steady, despite the earthquake beginning inside her chest. Wesley turned from the window, his expression almost regretful. This is honesty, Dahlia, something I promised you today, remember? Brooke sipped her champagne, a small smile playing at the corners of her red lips. Hello, Dahlia. Lovely ceremony. Very touching vows. The deliberate cruelty of the situation, the romantic suite, the renewal ceremony just hours ago, the calculated public promises, hit Dahlia like a physical blow. She reached for the doorframe to steady herself. "How long?" she asked, though the answer hardly mattered. 8 months, Wesley replied, though it became serious about 4 months ago. The timeline registered with sickening clarity. "When I got pregnant," Wesley shrugged, the gesture so dismissive it sent a surge of anger through Dahlia's shock. "Approximately. And this?" She gestured at the suite, the roses, the remnants of the day. "What was all this, some elaborate joke at my expense?" "Not a joke," Wesley corrected, setting down his champagne. "A necessary transition." "Transition to what?" "Divorce," he stated flatly. "On my terms." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Dahlia's legs threatened to give way, but she refused to collapse in front of them. Instead, she moved to a chair, sinking into it with as much dignity as she could muster. "Why now?" she asked. "Why this public recommitment if you wanted out?" Brooke laughed softly. "Oh, honey, don't be naive. It's all about optics and timing." Wesley shot Brooke a warning glance. "What Brooke means is that I wanted to be fair to you, to give us one last chance." "That's a lie," Dahlia said quietly. "This was never about giving us a chance. This was about humiliating me, making me the villain in our story when I inevitably fall apart and file for divorce after finding you with her." She nodded toward Brooke. "What I don't understand is why the elaborate setup. Why not just tell me you wanted out?" A flicker of something, discomfort, guilt, crossed Wesley's face. "It's complicated." "No, it's really not," Dahlia countered, a strange calm settling over her as pieces clicked into place. "Unless there's something else, something you're not telling me." Wesley and Brooke exchanged a look that confirmed Dahlia's suspicion. There was more to this cruelty than simple infidelity. "The business," she guessed. "Something's wrong with Hammond Developments, isn't it?" Wesley's expression hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Dahlia stood slowly, finding strength in her growing anger. "I may have given up my career for you, Wesley, but I didn't give up my brain. You're in trouble, serious trouble, and you need me to file for divorce before it becomes public. That's it, isn't it?" "She's smarter than you give her credit for," Brooke observed, an edge of nervousness creeping into her voice. "You didn't mention that part." "Shut up, Brooke," Wesley snapped. Then, regaining his composure, he turned back to Dahlia. "There are some financial irregularities being investigated. Nothing serious, but potentially complicated. Complicated enough that you orchestrated this entire charade to manipulate me into a quick, quiet divorce," Dahlia concluded. "So I'd be so hurt, so humiliated, that I'd agree to whatever terms you offered just to escape." "It would have been better for everyone," Wesley insisted, "including our child." The mention of their baby from the lips of a man who had just revealed himself to be a complete stranger sent a wave of protective fury through Dahlia. "Don't you dare bring our child into this. Don't you dare pretend any of this was for anyone but yourself." "Be reasonable, Dahlia," Wesley said, his tone shifting to the one he used for difficult business negotiations. "I'm willing to be generous in the settlement. More than generous, but I need this handled quickly and discreetly. Before the irregularities become public," she said, making air quotes around the euphemism. "Before whatever you've done catches up with you." "Precisely." He seemed almost relieved that she understood. "So we can agree to terms tonight, have the papers drawn up tomorrow and—" "No," Dahlia interrupted, the word sharp and definitive. "No?" Wesley's confident expression faltered. "No," she repeated, stronger this time. "I'm not agreeing to anything tonight, or tomorrow, or until I know exactly what irregularities I might be implicated in as your wife." Brooke stood, setting down her champagne glass with a sharp clink. "This isn't going as planned, Wesley. She's not falling apart." "She will," he replied coldly, "when she realizes the alternative." "And what's that?" Dahlia asked, chin lifted in defiance. "If you don't agree to my terms, if you drag this out, fight me on this." Wesley's voice dropped to a menacing register Dahlia had never heard before. "I'll make sure you get nothing, not financial support, not custody, nothing. I have resources you can't imagine, Dahlia. Lawyers who will tie this up for years. By the time it's over, our child will barely remember you." The threat sent ice through Dahlia's veins, but she refused to show fear. "You'd use our child as leverage? To protect yourself?" "I'd do whatever necessary to protect what I've built," he corrected. "The question is whether you want to be reasonable or foolish about this." Before Dahlia could respond, a sharp knock came at the suite door. 3 hard raps that echoed with authority. Wesley frowned. "Are you expecting room service?" "No," Dahlia replied, equally confused. The knocking came again, louder this time, followed by a voice that chilled Wesley's blood. "Federal agents! Open the door!" Brooke's face drained of color. "Wesley, what?" "Don't panic," he hissed, though his own composure was cracking. "It's probably just—" The knocking became pounding. "Hammond, open the door now or we will break it down!" Dahlia moved toward the door, but Wesley grabbed her arm, fingers digging painfully into her skin. "What did you do?" he demanded, panic making his voice shake. "Nothing," she replied honestly. "This isn't my doing." As the pounding continued, realization dawned in Wesley's eyes. "Mason," he spat, "your brother did this." In that moment, as federal agents began the process of breaking down the door of the presidential suite, as Brooke frantically gathered her purse and phone, as Wesley's carefully constructed world began to collapse around them, Dahlia felt a strange sense of liberation. "I think," she said quietly, pulling her arm from his grasp, "that your irregularities caught up with you sooner than you expected." The door burst open, revealing 4 agents in dark suits, their badges held aloft. "Wesley Hammond," the lead agent announced, "you're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and tax evasion." Behind them stood Mason, his expression grim but vindicated as he met his sister's eyes across the chaos of the suite. "You knew," Wesley accused Dahlia, as agents moved to handcuff him. "You planned this with him." "No," she replied, with a calm she didn't know she possessed. "But I'm not sorry it happened." As the agents recited Wesley's rights and began searching the suite, as Brooke was separately questioned in a corner, Dahlia walked to the window. Seattle sparkled below, the same city she'd always known, but somehow entirely different now. Like her life, recognizable in its outlines but transformed in an instant by the truth she'd suspected but hadn't wanted to face. Mason approached her carefully. "I'm sorry it had to be tonight. After the ceremony. We couldn't wait any longer." "How bad is it?" she asked, not turning from the window. "Bad," he admitted. 30 million in investor funds misappropriated. Offshore accounts. False statements to the SEC. Dahlia nodded, absorbing the information with surprising steadiness. "And I'm his wife with no prenup." "Yes," Mason confirmed. Which means I could be implicated," she finished, "or at least entangled in the financial fallout." Behind them, Wesley was being led toward the door in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury. He paused as they passed Dahlia. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "When it's all over, you'll have nothing. Remember that." Dahlia turned to face him fully, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "No, Wesley, I'll have something you never truly valued. I'll have myself." As the agents led him away, as the door closed behind them, Dahlia sank onto the window seat, the adrenaline that had sustained her beginning to ebb. The presidential suite, meant to be the setting for their romantic reconciliation, then co-opted as the stage for her humiliation, now felt like a strange liminal space. Not quite the end of her old life, not quite the beginning of her new one. "What happens now?" she asked her brother, who sat beside her, his solid presence the only familiar thing in her rapidly shifting world. "Now," Mason said gently, taking her hand, "we get you home. And tomorrow, we start figuring out the rest." As they left the suite, Dahlia paused at the doorway, looking back at the scattered rose petals, the champagne gone flat in abandoned glasses, the rumpled bed where Brooke had sat with such calculated insolence, the scene of the last act of her marriage. "Goodbye, Wesley," she whispered to the empty room. It wasn't just farewell to her husband, but to the woman she'd been with him, the compliant, hopeful, willfully blind wife who'd surrendered her identity piece by piece. That woman had died tonight in this suite. Who would rise from her ashes remained to be seen. The fluorescent lights of the FBI's Seattle field office buzzed overhead as Dahlia sat across from Special Agent Diana Lerner. 3 days had passed since Wesley's arrest. 72 hours that felt like both an eternity and an instant. "Mrs. Hammond, I want to be clear," Agent Lerner said, tapping her pen against a thick folder. "You're not a suspect in our investigation, but as his spouse with joint financial accounts and assets, you're in a unique position to help us understand the full scope of your husband's activities." Dahlia nodded, her hands resting in her lap. The navy blue blazer she wore, one of the few professional items she still owned from her curator days, felt like armor against the clinical scrutiny of the federal agents. "I understand. And it's Pierce. I'm using my maiden name again." Agent Lerner made a note. "Miss Pierce, then, when did you first suspect your husband was engaged in financial impropriety?" "I didn't," Dahlia admitted. "Not specifically. I knew something was wrong in our marriage, obviously. And the night of the arrest, just before you arrived, Wesley mentioned financial irregularities that might become complicated, but the extent of it..." She shook her head. "I had no idea. Yet you left a recording device in his office 3 weeks ago." Dahlia's eyes widened. "How did you..." "Your brother mentioned it during his interview. We'd like to hear that recording." "I never listened to it," Dahlia confessed. "I was afraid of what I might hear." "It's still in my vanity drawer at home." Agent Lerner nodded to a colleague who made a note. "We'll need that recording, Miss Pierce. It could be material evidence." "Of course. Now, about the offshore accounts." "I don't know anything about offshore accounts," Dahlia interrupted. "Wesley handled all our finances. He gave me an allowance each month for household expenses and personal spending. Everything else was..." She stopped, a realization dawning. "Everything else was his domain. He insisted on it. That arrangement didn't strike you as unusual, given your joint assets?" A flush of embarrassment crept up Dahlia's neck. "At the time, I saw it as, I don't know, traditional. He framed it as taking care of me, relieving me of financial worries." She laughed bitterly. "I was so focused on trying to salvage our emotional connection that I never questioned the financial control." Agent Lerner's expression softened slightly. "You'd be surprised how common that is, Ms. Pierce, even among highly educated, independent women." The interview continued for another hour. Questions about properties she might have visited, business associates who came to their home, documents she might have signed. Through it all, Dahlia felt a growing sense of unreality, as if they were discussing someone else's life. When it was finally over, she found Mason waiting in the lobby, his detective's badge visible on his belt as he paced the floor. "Are you okay?" he asked, studying her face. "Physically or emotionally?" She attempted a smile that didn't quite materialize. "Because physically I'm exhausted and hungry. Emotionally, I'm somewhere between numb and furious." "Let's address the physical first," Mason suggested, guiding her toward the exit. "Then we can tackle the emotional over dessert." At a quiet cafe several blocks from the federal building, Dahlia picked at a sandwich while Mason briefed her on what he'd learned. "The investigation has been underway for months," he explained. "The SEC noticed irregularities in Hammond Development's financial reporting last fall. They brought in the FBI when they discovered evidence of wire fraud across state lines." "And you knew all this time?" Mason's expression turned sheepish. "Not initially. I started looking into Wesley about 6 weeks ago, after that dinner when you seemed so diminished. I've never seen you like that, Dahl. It scared me. Why didn't you tell me what you found?" "Would you have believed me?" he asked gently. "If I had come to you with accusations about your husband, the father of your child, without concrete evidence?" Dahlia considered this, then sighed. "Probably not. I was so determined to make it work." "Exactly. I needed irrefutable proof before I approached you. By the time I had it, the feds were already building their case." He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I'm sorry it happened the way it did. The timing was brutal." "Actually," Dahlia said, surprising herself, "the timing was perfect." "Perfect? Dahl, you were arrested in your hotel suite on your vow renewal night. How is that perfect?" She met his gaze steadily. "Because if you'd been even an hour later, I might have signed whatever divorce agreement Wesley put in front of me." He had it all planned. The romantic ceremony for appearances, then the brutal humiliation with Brooke in our suite, all designed to break me so completely that I'd agree to anything just to escape the situation. She shook her head. "He wanted me to file for divorce before the scandal broke, on terms that protected his assets." Understanding dawned in Mason's eyes. "Instead, he's in federal custody, and you have time to protect yourself legally." "Exactly." She pushed her barely touched sandwich away. "Speaking of which, who's a good divorce attorney in this town? I need someone who won't be intimidated by Wesley's connections." "Already on it," Mason replied. "Remember Elena Vasquez from the DA's office? She's in private practice now, specializing in high-net-worth divorces with criminal complications. She's expecting your call." For the first time in days, Dahlia felt a genuine smile tug at her lips. What would I do without you? Probably still be kicking ass, just with less brotherly commentary. He studied her face. How are you really doing, Dal? With everything? She placed a protective hand over her small bump, a gesture that had become instinctive, taking it minute by minute. Dr. Sanjay wants to see me weekly now to monitor my blood pressure. Apparently, discovering your husband is both an adulterer and a criminal isn't great for maternal health. And the penthouse, are you comfortable staying there? Dahlia shook her head. I can't, not with all the memories, all his things. The FBI has seized his home office contents anyway. She hesitated. I was hoping I could stay with you for a few days while I figure things out. Already made up the guest room, Mason confirmed. Though fair warning, my housekeeping standards haven't improved since college. As they left the cafe, Dahlia's phone chimed with a text. She glanced down to find a message from Martin Chen, her former mentor. Just heard the news about Wesley. Call me when you're ready. The art world misses you. Something warm unfurled in her chest. The first hint that beyond the wreckage of her marriage, pieces of her old self might still exist, waiting to be reclaimed. Elena Vasquez's office overlooked Pioneer Square, the brick buildings of Seattle's historic district framed in her window. At 45, she carried herself with the confident precision of someone who had seen every possible legal maneuver and countered it successfully. Community property state, Elena stated, reviewing Dahlia's file. No prenuptial agreement, 2 years of marriage. Ordinarily, this would be straightforward. You'd be entitled to half of all assets acquired during the marriage. But, Dahlia prompted, hearing the implicit caveat. But when those assets were acquired through criminal activity, things get complicated. Eleanor removed her reading glasses. The government will be seizing assets connected to the fraud. That's non-negotiable. Our job is to identify legitimate assets that should remain beyond their reach and beyond Wesley's control. Is that even possible? Everything seems so entangled. It's challenging, but not impossible. Eleanor pulled out a yellow legal pad. Let's start with the basics. What assets are solely in your name? Dahlia thought for a moment. My personal checking account, which has about $30,000, savings from before our marriage that I never commingled, a small collection of contemporary art pieces I acquired during my curator days, and... She paused. That's it, I think. Everything else is joint or in Wesley's name. The penthouse? Joint, but with a Hammond Developments holding company as co-owner. It's complicated. Eleanor made notes. Vehicle. A Tesla Model X registered to me but purchased by Wesley, and a vintage MG convertible that was my grandfather's, which I owned before the marriage. Good. The MG is clearly separate property. The Tesla might be more complicated. Eleanor looked up. Now for the difficult part. Do you have any reason to believe Wesley might have hidden assets, accounts you weren't aware of, properties purchased under different names, valuable items stored away from your primary residence? Dahlia's mind flashed to subtle inconsistencies over the years, Wesley's unexplained absences, phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered a room, documents quickly hidden from view. I don't have proof, she said slowly, but yes, I suspect there might be hidden assets. Wesley was compartmentalized. There were parts of his life he kept completely separate from me, like his relationship with Ms. Mercer, Elena asked delicately. Among other things. Dahlia straightened in her chair. What's our next step? We file for divorce immediately, citing irreconcilable differences and abandonment. He's in federal custody after all. Then we request an emergency financial restraining order, preventing him from transferring, hiding, or disposing of any assets. Simultaneously, we begin forensic accounting to identify all marital assets and potential hidden accounts. Dahlia nodded, trying to absorb the strategy. And the baby? We file for full custody with supervised visitation rights for Wesley after his release, assuming he's convicted. Given the circumstances and his threats the night of his arrest, we have strong grounds. He'll fight it, Dahlia warned. Everything. He's not someone who accepts defeat. Elena's smile was grim and confident. Neither am I, Miss Pierce, neither am I. The gallery was closed to the public, but Martin Chen unlocked the door when he saw Dahlia approaching. 6 weeks had passed since Wesley's arrest. 6 weeks of legal meetings, FBI interviews, and doctor's appointments. Her pregnancy now showed clearly beneath her loose blouse, 16 weeks of new life growing despite the chaos surrounding it. You look good, Martin said, embracing her carefully. Pregnancy suits you." "Liar," she replied with a small smile. "I look exactly like what I am, a woman whose life exploded spectacularly in public." "Nonsense," he countered, leading her through the gallery. "You look like someone emerging from a storm, a bit windblown perhaps, but intact." They settled in his office, a cluttered space filled with art books, exhibition catalogues, and the gentle scent of Earl Grey tea, which he prepared from a small electric kettle. "So," he said, handing her a cup, "you're ready to talk about coming back." Dahlia blinked in surprise. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Why else would you be here?" He settled into his chair. "The Hammond scandal has been front-page news for weeks. Your soon-to-be ex-husband's face is on every business section in the country, and yet here you are, in an art gallery, looking more alive than you have in 2 years. She sipped her tea, buying time to consider his observation. "I do miss it," she finally admitted. "The art world, the sense of purpose, creating something meaningful instead of just existing as someone's wife." "Then come back," Martin said simply. "Not necessarily here, I know you've outgrown us, but somewhere. The Elliott Gallery has been floundering since you left, or the new contemporary space opening in Capitol Hill, or—" he hesitated. "Or," she prompted. "Or start your own," he suggested, watching her face carefully. "You always had an exceptional eye, Dahlia, and connections throughout the industry. Seattle could use a gallery with your sensibility, something that bridges traditional and emerging artists, that makes contemporary art accessible without dumbing it down." The idea landed like a stone in still water, ripples of possibility expanding outward. "Martin, I'm 5 months pregnant, and in the middle of a high-profile divorce from a man facing federal charges. Hardly the ideal time to launch a business venture. On the contrary," he countered, "it's precisely the right time. You need to reclaim your identity, your passion, and frankly, the art world loves a good comeback story." Dahlia laughed despite herself. "So I'm a comeback story now?" "You could be," he said, his expression turning serious. "That's entirely up to you." As she left the gallery an hour later, business plan templates and potential space listings tucked into her bag, Dahlia felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of possibility, of forward momentum. Her phone rang as she reached her car, the vintage MG reclaimed from storage where Wesley had insisted it belong. Elena Vasquez's name flashed on the screen. "Ms. Pierce, we've found something interesting," her lawyer said without preamble. "Our forensic accountant discovered a property in the San Juan Islands, purchased 3 years ago through a shell company. Officially, it belongs to a corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, but the beneficial owner appears to be your husband." "I've never heard of any island property," Dahlia said, frowning. "That's what makes it interesting. It was purchased before your marriage, but maintained with funds that would constitute marital assets. The deed is deliberately obscured, but the maintenance payments continued after his arrest, until our financial restraining order froze the accounts." "What kind of property are we talking about?" "A quite substantial waterfront home on Orcas Island, 5 bedrooms, private dock, 6 acres of land, valued at approximately $8 million. Dahlia leaned against her car, processing this information. "Why would he keep it secret from me?" "That's what we intend to find out," Elena replied. "We've scheduled a site visit for next week. Can you join us? Seeing the property firsthand might trigger memories or connections you weren't aware of." "Absolutely," Dahlia agreed, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I want to see everything Wesley tried to hide from me." Orcas Island revealed itself through the ferry windows, emerald green against the deep blue of the Salish Sea. Dahlia stood on the deck, the wind whipping her hair as Mason leaned on the railing beside her. "You didn't have to come," she told him, though she was grateful for his presence. "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," he replied. "Besides, I've always wanted to see how the criminally wealthy live." Elena and her forensic accountant, a meticulously detailed man named Henry Park, waited with the rental car. As they drove the winding roads of the horseshoe-shaped island, Dahlia was struck by the pristine beauty, dense forests, rolling hills, glimpses of secluded bays between the trees. "Turn here," Henry instructed as they approached a discreet driveway marked only with a number. According to property records, this access road was expanded significantly 3 years ago, just after the purchase. The private road wound through tall firs for nearly half a mile before revealing their destination, a stunning modern structure of glass, cedar and stone that seemed to grow organically from the rocky bluff overlooking the water. "My God," Mason murmured as they parked. No wonder he kept this hidden. Using the access code provided by the court order, Elena unlocked the front door. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Soaring ceilings, walls of glass framing panoramic water views, furniture that managed to be both minimalist and luxurious. This place must have cost a fortune, Dahlia observed, running her hand along a kitchen counter of polished concrete. The purchase price was $7.2 million, Henry confirmed, consulting his tablet, plus another $800,000 in renovations and furnishings. All while crying poor to the investors he was defrauding, Mason added bitterly. Dahlia moved through the space slowly, absorbing details. Unlike their Seattle penthouse, which had been designed by a high-end decorator to project a specific image, this home felt more personal, more authentic. The art on the walls wasn't selected for status, but for aesthetic appeal, pieces Dahlia herself might have chosen. "Has Wesley spent much time here?" she asked, studying a particularly striking abstract canvas. Henry consulted his notes. According to electrical and water usage, the property has been occupied approximately 1 week per month for the past 3 years, with heavier usage in summer. 1 week per month, Dahlia repeated, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. That's impossible. Wesley never took that much time away from Seattle, I would have noticed. Unless he told you he was somewhere else, Mason suggested gently. Business trips, late nights at the office? The implication hung in the air. Dahlia continued her exploration, moving upstairs to the master suite with its wall of windows overlooking the private cove below. The king-sized bed was simply made with expensive linens. The closet contained men's clothing, casual pieces unlike Wesley's usual formal wear, and women's clothing, not hers. Dahlia pulled out a silk blouse, a size too small for her frame. The colors, jewel tones, rich emeralds and deep purples, weren't her palette, but they would complement red hair perfectly. "Brooke," she whispered, the final piece clicking into place. As she replaced the blouse, something caught her eye, a small safe tucked into the back of the closet, partially concealed by the hanging clothes. "Eleanor," she called, "we need to get this open." The court order covered any locked containers on the property. Within 20 minutes, Henry had worked with the locksmith they'd brought along to open the safe. Inside lay the answers to questions Dahlia hadn't even known to ask. Offshore account documents, passport copies, Wesley's and Brooke's, property deeds in the Cayman Islands and Costa Rica, and cash, nearly $200,000 in various currencies, neatly bundled. "He was planning to run," Elena observed, photographing each item before Henry catalogued them. "If the investigation got too close." "Not alone," Dahlia added, thinking of the women's clothing, the dual passport copies. "This is significant," Elena said, her professional composure momentarily slipping. "This evidence suggests premeditation, deliberate concealment of assets, and potential flight risk. It strengthens both the federal case against him and our position in the divorce proceedings." As the others continued documenting their discoveries, Dahlia wandered onto the master suite's private balcony. Below, waves lapped gently against the private beach, a dock extending into the protected cove. She could imagine Wesley and Brooke here, planning their future while systematically destroying hers. Yet strangely, standing in this beautiful place that represented her husband's ultimate betrayal, Dahlia felt a sense of clarity washing over her like the clean island air. "You know what's ironic?" she said to Mason, who had joined her on the balcony. "If I'd discovered this place a year ago, it would have destroyed me. Now it's almost liberating." "Liberating how?" "It confirms that none of it was my fault," she explained. "There was nothing I could have done differently. No way I could have saved our marriage. Wesley was living a complete double life. The man I married never really existed." Mason leaned against the railing. "What are you going to do now?" Dahlia rested her hands on her growing belly, feeling the flutter of her child moving within. "I'm going to stop being a victim of Wesley's schemes and start being the architect of my own life again." "Meaning?" "Meaning I'm going to open my gallery," she said with sudden certainty. "I'm going to build something genuine and meaningful that's completely mine. Something to support myself and my child that has nothing to do with Wesley Hammond or his money." "That's a big step, doll, especially with the baby coming." "It is," she agreed. But standing here, seeing the elaborate lengths Wesley went to in order to maintain his lies, it makes me realize how much energy I've wasted trying to salvage something that never truly existed. I'm done looking backward. As they prepared to leave the island property, Eleanor approached with her tablet. Before we go, there's one more thing you should see. The property title is held by Nexus Horizon LLC, registered in the Caymans. But the operating agreement for that LLC names a trust as the beneficial owner. Let me guess, Dahlia said. A trust controlled by Wesley. Not exactly, Elena replied, her expression puzzled. The trust is called the Phoenix Rising Trust, and while Wesley is currently listed as trustee, the sole beneficiary is named as the firstborn child of Wesley Hammond. Dahlia's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. My baby? This property is ultimately held for my child? It appears so, Elena confirmed, though Wesley maintained complete control as trustee. Until now, Mason interjected. Until now, Elena agreed. Given the evidence of fraud and the ongoing federal case, we have grounds to petition for removal of Wesley as trustee. And since the beneficiary is your unborn child, I could be appointed trustee in his place, Dahlia finished, the implications expanding in her mind. Exactly, which would give you control of this property and potentially any other assets held by the trust. As the ferry pulled away from Orcas Island that evening, Dahlia watched the secret sanctuary grow smaller in the distance, the setting sun turning its windows to flame. In trying to create a hidden escape route, Wesley had inadvertently provided her with the foundation for her new beginning. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling another flutter of movement. We're going to be okay, she whispered to her child. Better than okay, we're going to build something real. For the first time since the night of Wesley's arrest, Dahlia Pierce felt not just determination, but genuine hope. Not the desperate hope of a woman clinging to a failing marriage, but the authentic hope of someone who had finally glimpsed her own strength, revealed in the wreckage of betrayal. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle hummed with tension as the most significant white-collar crime trial in the city's recent history entered its second week. Outside, news vans lined the street, while reporters delivered updates against the backdrop of the imposing stone building. In the crowded courtroom, Wesley Hammond sat beside his defense attorney, his appearance meticulously crafted to project humility and contrition, his bespoke suits replaced by more modest attire, his usual confidence subdued into an expression of concerned seriousness. Only those who knew him well could detect the cold calculation behind his eyes as he watched the proceedings unfold. The defense calls Richard Kwan to the stand, announced Gregory Walsh, Wesley's high-powered attorney. Richard Kwan, Hammond Development's former CFO, approached the witness stand. His shoulders hunched slightly as he felt the weight of the courtroom's attention. After being sworn in, he settled nervously into the chair. Mr. Kwan, Walsh began, could you please describe your working relationship with Wesley Hammond? I served as Chief Financial Officer at Hammond Developments for 6 years, Kwan replied, his voice steady, despite his obvious discomfort. And during that time, who had final authority over the company's financial decisions? That would be Mr. Hammond as CEO and majority shareholder. Walsh nodded, approaching the witness stand. However, as CFO, you were responsible for implementing those financial strategies, correct? For ensuring their proper execution and documentation. Kwan shifted in his seat. Yes, that was part of my responsibility. Could you tell the court who personally created the offshore account structures that the prosecution has characterized as vehicles for fraud? A moment of hesitation. I did, under Mr. Hammond's direction. Under his direction, Walsh repeated. But using your expertise, your knowledge of international finance law, your professional judgment. Objection, called the federal prosecutor. Counsel is leading the witness. Sustained, ruled Judge Harmon, a stern-faced woman with 3 decades of experience presiding over financial crime cases. From her seat in the gallery, Dahlia Pierce watched the proceedings with an outward calm that belied the storm within. At 34 weeks pregnant, her body felt simultaneously powerful and vulnerable, her daughter's movements a constant reminder of what was at stake. Mason sat beside her, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad. He's trying to shift blame to his subordinates, Mason whispered. Classic strategy. Dahlia nodded slightly, her gaze fixed on the back of Wesley's head. In the 4 months since his arrest, she had seen him only once, at a divorce hearing where he had sat across the conference table, refusing to look directly at her. speaking only through his attorneys. As Kwan's testimony continued, Dahlia felt her daughter shift position, a sharp movement that caused her to inhale sharply. Mason glanced at her with concern. "You okay?" he murmured. "Fine," she replied. "She's just active today." When the court recessed for lunch, Dahlia stood carefully, supporting her lower back as she made her way to the hallway. She had nearly reached the doors when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Dahlia." She turned to find Brooke Mercer standing several feet away, looking markedly different from the confident woman who had sat in that hotel suite 4 months ago. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a simple blouse and pants. Her red hair pulled back severely, dark circles visible beneath her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here," Dahlia said, her voice neutral. "I testify tomorrow," Brooke replied, glancing nervously toward where U.S. Marshals escorted Wesley from the courtroom, "as part of my cooperation agreement." Understanding dawned. "You're working with the prosecution." "I had no choice," Brooke said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "They had evidence of my involvement. Limited immunity was the only option." Dahlia studied the woman who had participated in her humiliation, who had planned to flee the country with her husband while pregnant with his child. She expected to feel rage, but instead found only a weary contempt. "Was any of it real?" she asked quietly. "Between you and Wesley? Or was that just another business arrangement?" Something flickered across Brooke's face. Pain, or perhaps simply regret at a miscalculation. "I thought it was real," she finally admitted. "I believed everything he promised, that we'd be together after the divorce, that he had contingency plans for the investigation, that we'd start fresh somewhere else." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was just as deceived as you were, just in different ways." Before Dahlia could respond, she felt a sudden sharp pain radiate across her abdomen. She gasped, clutching the nearby wall for support. "Are you all right?" Brooke asked, taking an instinctive step forward. "I'm fine," Dahlia managed, though the pain suggested otherwise. "Just Braxton Hicks." Mason appeared at her side, immediately noticing her discomfort. He glared at Brooke. "What did you say to her?" "Nothing," Brooke replied, backing away. "I was just—" "Mason, it's okay," Dahlia interrupted, straightening as the contraction passed. "We were just talking." "Well, talk's over," he said firmly, placing a protective arm around his sister. "You need to sit down and have some water." As they moved toward a bench, Dahlia glanced back at Brooke, who stood alone in the courthouse hallway, looking lost. A woman who had gambled everything on Wesley Hammond and was now facing the consequences of that choice. "What did she want?" Mason asked once they were seated. "Nothing specific," Dahlia replied. "I think she's just scared, realizing that her testimony tomorrow means burning her last bridge with Wesley." Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the first. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing the way her birthing class had taught her. "That's 2 in 15 minutes, Mason observed, checking his watch. "Maybe we should skip the afternoon session and get you checked out." "No," Dahlia insisted. "Tomorrow is Brooke's testimony. I need to hear what she says. I need to see Wesley's face when she betrays him the way he betrayed me." Mason looked skeptical but didn't argue further. "At least eat something. And promise you'll tell me if these contractions keep coming regularly." Dahlia nodded, though her attention was already drifting to the afternoon ahead, to the testimony that would either strengthen or weaken the case against the man who had nearly destroyed her. The following morning dawned gray and rainy, Seattle's typical January gloom settling over the city. Dahlia had slept poorly, intermittent contractions, and the anticipation of Brooke's testimony keeping her awake through the night. By the time she arrived at the courthouse, dark circles shadowed her eyes. "You look exhausted," Elena Vasquez commented as they took their seats in the gallery. The divorce attorney had joined them to observe the criminal proceedings that would impact their case. "Are you sure you're up for this?" "I have to be," Dahlia replied simply. When Brooke took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She avoided looking at Wesley, keeping her gaze fixed either on the prosecutor or on her folded hands. "Ms. Mercer," began the federal prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Carolyn Reese, "when did you become aware of Mr. Hammond's fraudulent financial activities?" "Objection," called Walsh. "Characterization." "Sustained," ruled Judge Harmon. "Rephrase, counselor." "When did you become aware of the offshore accounts Mr. Hammond had established?" Reese amended. Brooke straightened in her chair. "About 6 months into our relationship. Last November." And how did you discover these accounts? Wesley, Mr. Hammond, showed me the documentation himself. He said he was setting up our exit strategy in case the SEC investigation gained traction. In the defendant's chair, Wesley's jaw tightened visibly. Did Mr. Hammond explain the purpose of these accounts? He said they were a safeguard, places to hold assets that couldn't be easily traced or seized if things went sideways with the South Lake Union project. Did he indicate awareness that these actions were illegal? Objection, Walsh interjected, calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, Reese offered smoothly. Ms. Mercer, did Mr. Hammond ever discuss the legality of these financial arrangements with you? Brooke hesitated, then nodded. He said that what happens offshore stays offshore, that the accounts were technically not compliant, but virtually untraceable. She swallowed hard. He said everyone in real estate development did it. He was just better at it than most. As the testimony continued, Dahlia watched Wesley's body language grow increasingly tense. When Brooke described their plans to leave the country using the documents and cash stored in the Orcas Island house, he finally turned to glare at her, betrayal evident in every line of his face. And what was the plan regarding Mr. Hammond's wife and unborn child? Reese asked. Brooke's gaze flickered briefly to Dahlia before returning to the prosecutor. Wesley said he had it handled, that Dahlia would file for divorce after he arranged for her to find us together. He said she'd be so devastated she'd accept whatever settlement he offered just to end things quickly. And did this plan include financial provisions for his child? He said the child would be taken care of, that he'd set up a trust that would provide financial support without giving Dahlia access to the bulk of his protected assets. A sharp contraction swept through Dahlia's body, stronger than any previous ones. She gripped the bench, breathing carefully through the pain. Mason noticed immediately. "That's it," he whispered. "We're going to the hospital." "Not yet," she insisted through gritted teeth. "I need to hear the rest." Reese was presenting documentation now, emails between Wesley and Brooke discussing their escape plans, transfers to the offshore accounts, preparations for assuming new identities in Costa Rica. Ms. Mercer, who actually executed these wire transfers to the Cayman Islands accounts? Wesley did. He had the authentication codes. He made me watch once, said I needed to know how to access the funds if anything happened to him. Wesley leaned forward to whisper urgently to his attorney, his composure finally cracking. Walsh shook his head slightly, placing a restraining hand on his client's arm. Another contraction hit Dahlia, this one causing her to gasp audibly. Several heads turned in her direction. "Dahl," Mason urged. "These are coming every 12 minutes now. This isn't a drill." Before she could respond, the judge noticed her distress. "Is there a medical situation in my courtroom?" Judge Harmon inquired, peering over her glasses. "I'm fine, Your Honor," Dahlia called, embarrassed by the attention. "Please continue." "Are you in labor, ma'am?" the judge asked directly. "Possibly, Your Honor, but then I suggest you proceed to a hospital rather than my courtroom," Judge Harmon stated firmly. "This trial will continue regardless of your presence." As Mason helped her to her feet, Dahlia found herself suddenly the focus of the entire courtroom, including Wesley, who stared at her with an unreadable expression as his former assistant detailed his crimes from the witness stand. "This isn't how I wanted to leave," Dahlia whispered to Mason as they made their way toward the exit. "I know," he replied, "but some things can't wait, even revenge." 18 hours later, as Seattle awakened to another rainy morning, Evelyn Grace Pierce entered the world with a powerful cry that seemed to announce her independence from the turbulent circumstances of her conception. "She's perfect," the obstetrician declared, placing the red-faced, dark-haired infant on Dahlia's chest. 6 pounds, 4 ounces of healthy determination. Tears streamed down Dahlia's face as she cradled her daughter for the first time. The exhaustion of labor melted away, replaced by a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "Hello, Evelyn," she whispered, tracing the perfect curve of her daughter's cheek. "We're going to be just fine, you and I." Mason, who had stayed through the entire labor, wiped tears from his own eyes. "She's beautiful, Dahl, and she looks nothing like him, thank God." Dahlia laughed softly. "That's not how genetics works, Mason. Let me have my delusions," he replied with a grin. "By the way, Elena called while you were pushing." Brooke finished her testimony. Apparently she absolutely destroyed Wesley's defense. "The prosecution feels confident." "Good," Dahlia said, her attention never leaving Evelyn's face. "But right now, I don't care about Wesley Hammond. Not while I'm holding her. For 3 days, Dahlia remained in the peaceful bubble of the maternity ward, learning to nurse, to change diapers, to interpret Evelyn's different cries. The world outside, with its courtrooms and lawyers and financial investigations, seemed distant and inconsequential compared to the miracle in her arms. On the 4th day, as she prepared to take Evelyn home to the apartment she'd rented near her brother's place, Elena arrived with a vase of lilies and news from the outside world. "The jury's deliberating," she announced, after appropriate admiration of the newborn. "They've been out for 2 days. The consensus is that's bad news for Wesley. Quick verdicts usually favor defendants." Dahlia nodded, adjusting Evelyn against her shoulder. "Any news on our case?" "The discovery of the Orcas Island property and the Phoenix Rising Trust has been a game-changer," Elena confirmed. "The judge granted our motion to remove Wesley as trustee. As of yesterday, you're now in control of all trust assets as trustee for Evelyn." "What about the other properties? The ones in the Caymans and Costa Rica?" "That's more complicated. The federal government has frozen those pending the verdict. If he's convicted, they'll likely be seized as proceeds of criminal activity." Dahlia considered this information as she gently patted Evelyn's back. "What if I want to see him before the verdict?" Elena's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Wesley? Why would you want that?" "Call it closure," Dahlia replied. "There are things I need to say to him face to face for my own healing." "I strongly advise against it," Elena cautioned. "Anything you say could potentially impact both the criminal case and our divorce proceedings." "I understand the risks," Dahlia insisted, "but I need to do this for me, for Evelyn." Elena studied her client's determined expression and sighed. "I'll see what I can arrange, but I want to be present for any meeting." "That's fine," Dahlia agreed, "but it needs to be soon, before the verdict." The visitors' room at the Federal Detention Center was austere. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, a table bolted to the floor with chairs on either side. Dahlia sat straight-backed on one side, Elena beside her. The baby carrier containing a sleeping Evelyn rested on the floor next to her. When the door opened and Wesley entered, escorted by a guard, Dahlia was struck by how diminished he appeared. The confident, commanding presence that had once dominated every room now seemed contained, reduced. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, suggesting weight loss, and a stubble shadowed his usually clean-shaven jaw. His eyes moved immediately to the baby carrier, widening slightly before returning to Dahlia's face. "You had the baby," he stated flatly as he sat across from her. "Evelyn Grace Pierce," Dahlia confirmed. "Born during Brooks' testimony. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Something flickered across his face at the mention of Brooks' name. "You gave her your last name?" "Yes." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Wesley finally spoke again. "Why are you here, Dahlia? What do you want?" "Closure," she replied simply. "And to show you what you've lost." His jaw tightened. "If you came to gloat—" "I didn't," she interrupted. "I came to understand. To look you in the eye and ask, was any of it real, our marriage, your supposed love, or was I just a convenient cover story while you built your exit strategy with Brooke?" Wesley leaned back, studying her with the calculating gaze she now recognized all too well. "Does it matter? Will any answer I give change anything?" "It matters to me." He sighed, running a hand through hair that had begun to show more gray. "Parts of it were real," he admitted finally. "In the beginning. You were different from other women I'd known, less impressed by the trappings of success, more interested in substance. I found that refreshing. Until it became inconvenient," Dahlia observed. "Until it became clear we wanted different things," he corrected. "You wanted the fairy tale, love, family, connection. I wanted freedom, options, control. So you led a double life, built a secret house for your mistress while I was pregnant with your child." Wesley's gaze flicked to the baby carrier again. "The Orcas property was an investment and a contingency plan. A contingency plan that I now control," Dahlia informed him, satisfaction coloring her voice. "As trustee for Evelyn's trust." Surprise registered on his face. "How did you—" "The same way the feds found your offshore accounts," she replied. "Good forensic accounting. Turns out your careful planning worked against you. By placing that property in a trust for our child, you inadvertently ensured I would have control of it once you were removed as trustee due to criminal activity. Your attorney's idea, I presume," he said coldly. "Actually, it was mine," Dahlia countered. You underestimated me, Wesley, you always did. His expression hardened. Is that why you're here? To tell me how clever you've been while I sit in jail awaiting a verdict that could put me away for 20 years? No, she said quietly. I'm here because I wanted you to see her. Dahlia reached down to adjust the blanket covering Evelyn, who had begun to stir. Your daughter, the one you were willing to abandon. Wesley's composure cracked slightly as he leaned forward to see the infant's face. Something like longing crossed his features before he mastered it. She has your coloring. She has your eyes, Dahlia replied. Clear blue. The doctors say they might change, but I don't think they will. His gaze lifted from the baby to Dahlia's face. What do you want from me, Dahlia? I have nothing left to give. The feds have frozen my assets. The company is in receivership. Even if I'm acquitted, which seems unlikely after Brooks' testimony, I'll be financially ruined. I don't want anything from you, she said truthfully. Not anymore. What I want is for you to understand what your choices have cost you. Not just money or freedom, but this. She gently lifted Evelyn from the carrier, cradling her against her shoulder where Wesley could see her clearly. A daughter who will grow up knowing only stories about her father. A family that could have been yours if you hadn't been so focused on escape routes and contingency plans. For a moment, the mask of cool calculation slipped completely, revealing a flash of genuine regret in Wesley's eyes as he looked at his daughter. But it passed quickly, replaced by the defensive armor he wore so well. Spare me the moral lecture, he said coldly. You've won, Dahlia. You get the moral high ground, the sympathy, the trust assets. I get a cell and a ruined reputation. Isn't that enough? This isn't about winning, Dahlia replied, settling Evelyn back into her carrier. It's about truth, about consequences, about looking you in the eye one last time and letting you know that despite everything you did, all the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal, I'm going to be fine, better than fine, because while you were building escape routes, I was finding my strength. She stood, gathering her belongings. Goodbye, Wesley, I won't be visiting again. Wait, he said suddenly, an edge of desperation breaking through his facade. When she's older, will you tell her about me? Dahlia paused, considering the question seriously. I'll tell her the truth, that her father made choices that took him away from us, that he created a trust to provide for her financially, which shows he cared in his way. The rest will be up to her when she's old enough to decide for herself. As she turned to leave, Wesley called after her. The jury's been out 3 days. What will you do if they acquit me? Dahlia looked back at him one last time. Live my life, raise our daughter, open my gallery. The verdict doesn't change who you are, Wesley, or who I've become. 2 days later, as Dahlia sat in her new apartment nursing Evelyn, her phone rang. Mason's name flashed on the screen. They're back, he said without preamble. The jury's reached a verdict. Dahlia's heart quickened. When? They're reading it now. I'm at the courthouse. A pause, then, do you want me to call you back after? No, she said, shifting Evelyn to her shoulder. Stay on the line. I want to hear it in real time. The background noise on Mason's end increased as he apparently entered the courtroom. Dahlia could hear murmured conversations, the shuffle of people finding seats. Then a commanding voice. All rise, the Honorable Judge Elaine Harmon presiding. The formal proceedings continued, the jury filing in, the judge asking if they'd reached a verdict, the foreman confirming they had. Then, the moment of truth. On count 1, wire fraud. How do you find? We find the defendant, Wesley Hammond, guilty. Dahlia closed her eyes, a complex wave of emotions washing over her. On count 2, securities fraud. How do you find? Guilty. On count 3, tax evasion. How do you find? Guilty. One by one, the counts were read. 7 in total, guilty verdicts on each. As the final one was announced, Dahlia could hear a commotion in the background. What's happening? She asked Mason. Hammond just collapsed, he replied in a hushed voice. They're calling for medical assistance. I think it was just shock, though. He's already sitting up. Dahlia looked down at Evelyn, now sleeping peacefully against her chest. It's over then. The criminal case is, Mason confirmed. Sentencing will come later, but with these charges he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Dahlia, are you okay? She considered the question carefully, assessing her true feelings beyond the shock and vindication of the moment. Yes, she said finally, with mild surprise at the truth of it. I really am, for the first time in a long time. As she ended the call, Dahlia carried Evelyn to the window overlooking Elliott Bay. In the distance, The same Seattle skyline that had once represented her gilded cage now symbolized possibility, a city where she would build a new life on her own terms. "It's just us now, little one," she whispered to her daughter, "and we're going to be extraordinary." In a courthouse across town, Wesley Hammond sat stunned as U.S. Marshals prepared to take him back to the detention center. The empire he had built through calculation and deception had crumbled entirely. The offshore accounts designed as safety nets had become evidence of his crimes. The woman he had underestimated now controlled the one asset he couldn't hide, and the child he had been willing to abandon would grow up never knowing him as anything but a cautionary tale. As they led him from the courtroom, his gaze caught on a small news headline scrolling across a reporter's laptop. "Phoenix Gallery to open in Capitol Hill this spring. Founder Dahlia Pierce promises art that transforms." Even in his moment of complete defeat, Wesley Hammond recognized the symbolism, the phoenix rising from the ashes of what he had tried to destroy. In the end, his most perfect deception had been believing he could control everything, including the woman whose strength he had never truly seen until it was too late. The Phoenix Gallery glowed with warm light against the early autumn evening. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the minimalist interior, where Seattle's art enthusiasts mingled, among carefully curated installations. At the center of it all stood Dahlia Pierce, in a simple black dress, her caramel hair styled in loose waves, a glass of champagne in hand as she spoke animatedly with potential investors. 6 months had passed since Wesley's conviction and sentencing, 18 years with the possibility of parole after 12. 6 months of rebuilding, of late nights drafting business plans after Evelyn fell asleep, of reconnecting with artists and collectors who had once respected her curatorial vision. "The concept is accessibility without compromise," she explained to the small group gathered around her. "Contemporary art that challenges without alienating. We're particularly focused on emerging Pacific Northwest artists who blend traditional influences with modern perspectives." Martin Chen approached, pride evident in his expression as he surveyed the gallery's opening night success. "You've exceeded even my optimistic expectations," he said, touching glasses with his former protege. "Full house, 3 red dots already, and the Seattle Arts Commission director cornered me to praise your bold vision." Dahlia smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way it rarely had during her marriage. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Martin." "Nonsense. This is all you." He glanced toward the back office where Mason was visible through the doorway, gently rocking 8-month-old Evelyn. "How's motherhood treating you?" "It's exhausting, exhilarating, and exactly what I needed," she replied honestly, "though I wouldn't recommend launching a business with a nursing infant. Thank God for Mason and his unlimited uncle energy." As if on cue, Evelyn let out a wail that carried clearly into the main gallery space. Dahlia handed her champagne to Martin. "Duty calls, can you cover for me?" "Take your time," he assured her. "I'll steer the Burke Foundation representative toward the Nakamura installation. They're perfect for each other." In the small but efficient office, Mason was already warming a bottle of expressed milk in a water bath. "Sorry," he said as Dahlia entered. "I think she's overtired. Too much excitement." "It's fine." Dahlia took her daughter, whose cries immediately softened to whimpers at her mother's familiar scent. "She's allowed to express her artistic opinions loudly. It's genetic." As she settled into the office chair to feed Evelyn, Dahlia caught sight of the evening's guest list on her desk. A name had been added in Mason's handwriting, Brooke Mercer. "She actually came?" Dahlia asked, surprised. Mason nodded. "Arrived about 20 minutes ago, keeping to herself near the back installation. I've been watching her. She seems subdued." Dahlia hadn't seen Brooke since the trial, though she'd heard through Seattle's gossip channels that after receiving a suspended sentence for her cooperation, Brooke had been unable to find work in the corporate world. The last rumor placed her working at a small marketing firm in Tacoma, a significant step down from her executive assistant position at Hammond Developments. "I should talk to her," Dahlia decided. "How you absolutely should not," Mason countered. "Why invite that drama into tonight's success?" "Because I'm curious," she admitted, "and because it feels important somehow, to close that chapter properly." Mason's protective instincts were visibly at war with his respect for his sister's judgment. "Fine," he conceded, "but I'm keeping Evelyn while you do, and staying within eyesight." After Evelyn had been fed and settled back to sleep in the portable crib Dahlia kept in her office, she returned to the gallery floor. The crowd had thinned slightly as the evening progressed, making it easier to spot Brooke standing alone before a large abstract canvas in the back corner. Dahlia approached quietly, pausing beside her former rival to study the painting, a turbulent composition of blues and greys with a single slash of gold cutting through the darkness. "Aftermath," Dahlia said, quoting the title. "The artist created it after losing her home in a wildfire. She said she wanted to capture that moment when devastation and possibility exist simultaneously." Brooke startled slightly, then composed herself. "It's powerful," she acknowledged without looking directly at Dahlia, "though I'm surprised you invited me tonight. I wouldn't have come if I thought it would make you uncomfortable." "I didn't invite you specifically," Dahlia clarified. "The opening was publicized. Anyone interested in contemporary art is welcome." Brooke finally turned to face her, and Dahlia was struck by the changes 6 months had wrought. The confident, predatory woman from the hotel suite had been replaced by someone more contained, less certain. Her red hair was shorter now, her designer clothes exchanged for more modest attire. "Congratulations on the gallery," Brooke said after an awkward pause. "It's impressive, especially considering—" She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. "Especially considering my life imploded less than a year ago," Dahlia supplied with a raised eyebrow. "Yes, I suppose it is." Another uncomfortable silence stretched between them before Brooke spoke again, her voice lower. "I wanted to say, not that it matters now, but I am sorry for my part in what happened to you." Dahlia studied her carefully, weighing the apparent sincerity against her lingering anger. "Are you sorry for the affair or sorry you got caught in Wesley's collapse?" "Both," Brooke admitted. "I was selfish and blind. I believed what I wanted to believe about him, about us, about you. What did you believe about me? That you were the obstacle, the naive, pampered wife who didn't appreciate what she had." Brooke laughed bitterly. "The irony is, I was the naive one. Wesley convinced me we had something special while he was planning to use me, just like he used everyone else." Dahlia could have responded with righteous anger, could have reminded Brooke of the hotel suite humiliation, of the matching clothes in the Orcas Island closet. Instead, she found herself saying, "He was very good at making people see what he wanted them to see." "Yes," Brooke agreed, surprise flickering across her face at Dahlia's measured response. "But that doesn't excuse what I did. I knew you were pregnant, and I still participated in that night." The memory of the hotel suite confrontation flashed vividly in Dahlia's mind. The rose petals, the champagne, the deliberate cruelty of their setup. Yet standing here now, in her own gallery surrounded by evidence of her resilience, the pain of that night felt strangely distant. "We were both victims of Wesley's manipulations," Dahlia said finally. "In different ways, but victims nonetheless." "You're being remarkably kind," Brooke observed cautiously. "Not kind," Dahlia corrected. "Just honest. Hating you requires energy I'd rather invest elsewhere." She gestured toward the surrounding gallery. "Like here, or in my daughter." At the mention of Evelyn, Brooke's gaze flickered toward the office where Mason stood in the doorway, watching their interaction closely. "How is she, your daughter?" "Perfect," Dahlia replied simply. The one truly good thing to come from all of this. Brooke nodded, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small envelope. "I brought this for you. A gallery warming gift, I suppose, though that's not really a thing." She handed the envelope to Dahlia. "You don't have to open it now, or ever, if you prefer not to." Curiosity overcame caution, and Dahlia opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $75,000. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "My severance from Hammond Developments," Brooke explained. "Paid out before the assets were frozen. I didn't earn it, honestly, and I certainly don't deserve it after what happened. I thought maybe it could help with the gallery, or with Evelyn." Dahlia stared at the check, a complex mixture of emotions churning within her. Part of her wanted to tear it up, to reject anything connected to her past with Wesley. But another part recognized the significance of the gesture, not just the money itself, but what it represented. Brooke's acknowledgement of wrongdoing, her attempt at tangible amends. "I can't accept this," Dahlia said finally, extending the check back to Brooke. "Please," Brooke insisted, "I need to do something, to try to balance the scales, even if it's impossible." Dahlia considered for a moment, then tucked the check back into the envelope. "If you want to make amends, donate it to the Children's Art Therapy Program at Harborview Medical Center. They work with kids who've experienced trauma. That would be a better use than either of us could make of it. Relief visibly washed over Brooke's face. I will. Thank you for the suggestion and for... She gestured between them. This, talking to me when you had every right to have security throw me out. The Phoenix Gallery is about transformation, Dahlia replied, gesturing toward the painting beside them. About finding beauty after destruction. That has to include the possibility of redemption, even for people who've made terrible mistakes. As Brooke nodded and turned to leave, Dahlia added, That doesn't mean we're friends, Brooke, but it does mean I recognize we're both working to create something new from the wreckage Wesley left behind. After Brooke departed, Mason joined his sister, concern evident in his expression. Everything okay? Surprisingly, yes, Dahlia replied, watching as gallery assistants began tactfully ushering the last guests toward the exit. That was unexpectedly healing. You continue to amaze me, Mason said, squeezing her shoulder. I'd have told her exactly where to go and how to get there, which is why I handle the delicate client relations and you handle security, she teased. As the last guests departed and the gallery staff began the closing procedures, Dahlia retreated to her office, where Evelyn still slept peacefully. She sank into her chair, the adrenaline of the successful opening finally ebbing, leaving room for reflection. On her desk sat a small leather-bound notebook, her gallery journal where she recorded not just business matters, but personal milestones in this new chapter of her life. She opened it to a blank page and wrote, Opening night, 37 attendees, 4 sales, including the Chen Commission, 1 unexpected reconciliation. Below this, she hesitated, then added, Today I realized I'm truly free of Wesley Hammond, not because he's in prison, but because I no longer need him to be. 3 days later, Dahlia drove the winding roads of Orcas Island, Evelyn securely fastened in her car seat behind her. The autumn colors were at their peak, maples and oaks blazing orange and red against the evergreen backdrop. As she turned onto the private drive that led to the property that now legally belonged to the Phoenix Rising Trust, with herself as trustee, a sense of anticipation built within her. She hadn't returned to the island house since the discovery expedition with Elena and Mason. At the time, it had represented everything painful about Wesley's betrayal, his secret life, his escape plan with Brooke, his willingness to abandon his family. But today, approaching the property with Evelyn gurgling happily in the back seat, Dahlia saw it differently. The modern structure emerged from the trees, its glass and cedar exterior reflecting the afternoon light. Dahlia parked in the circular drive and sat for a moment, gathering her thoughts before retrieving Evelyn from her car seat. Welcome to your trust property, little one, she said, lifting her daughter into her arms. Though I think we'll need to redecorate extensively. Inside, the house was exactly as they had left it months earlier. The FBI had processed it as a crime scene, catalogued its contents, then released it back to the trust once they confirmed no illegal activities had taken place on the property itself. It remained a stunning architectural achievement with its soaring ceilings and panoramic water views, but the furnishings and decor still carried the imprint of Wesley's taste and Brooke's presence. Dahlia moved through the space systematically, Evelyn on her hip, making notes on her phone of changes she wanted to implement. The master bedroom, where she had discovered Brooke's clothing in the closet, would become a combination guest room and art studio. The second bedroom would be Evelyn's when she was old enough to appreciate it. The third would remain a guest room for when Mason or friends visited. In the kitchen, she set Evelyn in the portable high chair she'd brought along and prepared a light lunch from the groceries they'd picked up in East Sound. As they ate together, Dahlia a sandwich, Evelyn mashed bananas, she gazed out at the private cove below, where a pair of otters played in the protected waters. What do you think, Evie? She asked her daughter, who responded by offering a banana-covered fist in her direction. I agree. It's beautiful here. Too beautiful to let painful memories claim it. After lunch, during Evelyn's nap in her portable crib, Dahlia made her way to the office, the one room she had deliberately saved for last. This had been Wesley's command center, the place where he'd planned his escape from justice, from responsibility, from their marriage. The sleek desk still held the ghostly outline where his computer had sat before the FBI seized it as evidence. She opened the drawers one by one, finding them mostly empty except for basic supplies, and a few innocuous documents that hadn't interested federal investigators. In the bottom drawer, however, she discovered a folder labeled simply contingencies. Inside were printed emails between Wesley and his attorney, discussing various scenarios related to the SEC investigation, including one that made Dahlia's blood run cold. If worst comes to worst, Wesley had written, the trust is our fail-safe. Even if convicted, I maintain control as trustee. Dee will never find the connection to the Cayman structure, and by the time the feds unravel it, the statute of limitations on the original transfers will have expired. The response from his attorney, risky strategy. If she discovers the trust before conviction, she could petition for your removal as trustee on grounds of breach of fiduciary duty or potential bankruptcy implications. Recommend alternative approach. Dahlia sat back, the pieces clicking into place. The Orcas Island property, held in the Phoenix Rising Trust with Evelyn as beneficiary, had never been intended as genuine provision for their child. It had been Wesley's final backup plan, assets hidden in plain sight, controlled by him regardless of what happened with the SEC investigation or criminal charges. She had unknowingly thwarted his plan by discovering the property before his conviction, allowing her legal team to successfully petition for his removal as trustee due to his criminal activities. What Wesley had intended as his safety net had become her new foundation. The irony was so perfect it almost made her laugh. Footsteps on the deck outside interrupted her thoughts. Dahlia tensed, immediately rising to check on Evelyn. The house was remote, accessible only by the private road. No one should be here. She moved quietly through the house to the great room where the deck was visible through the glass walls. Relief washed over her when she recognized Elena Vasquez standing outside, admiring the view. "You scared me," Dahlia said as she opened the sliding door. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "Sorry for the surprise," Elena replied. "I tried calling, but there's no signal on this side of the island. When you mentioned you were coming up today, I thought I'd join you. I have some documents that need signatures, and frankly, I was curious to see this place again now that it's officially under your control." Dahlia invited her in, offering coffee while they sat at the massive dining table overlooking the water. Elena spread several legal documents between them. "The divorce is officially final," she announced, sliding the top paper toward Dahlia. "Signed by the judge yesterday. Given Wesley's conviction and incarceration, it was straightforward once we established the trust issue." Dahlia traced her fingers lightly over the decree. After all the pain, the betrayal, the drama of the arrest and trial, the actual dissolution of her marriage came down to a few pages of legal language and a judge's signature. "I should feel something more profound," she admitted, "but it just feels like paperwork." "The emotional divorce happened long ago," Eleanor observed. "This is just the legal formality catching up." "I suppose you're right." Dahlia turned to the next document. "And this?" "The court order officially naming you sole trustee of the Phoenix Rising Trust with full discretionary powers regarding the trust assets, including this property. Wesley's attempt to appeal this decision from prison was denied last week." Dahlia nodded, signing where indicated. "How is he, Wesley?" Elena looked surprised by the question. "I wouldn't know firsthand, but my contact at the federal prosecutor's office says he's been a model prisoner so far. Requested business and financial management books for the prison library. Apparently he's giving informal lectures to other inmates on investment strategies." "Of course he is," Dahlia said with a rueful smile. "Even in prison, Wesley finds a way to be the expert in the room. He also requested visitation with Evelyn," Elena added carefully, "through his attorney." Dahlia's hand stilled over the papers. "And nothing unless you agree. He has no automatic right to visitation given the circumstances of his conviction and the nature of his threats regarding custody before his arrest. The ball is entirely in your court." Dahlia glanced toward the room where Evelyn still napped peacefully. "Not now," she decided. "Maybe when she's older and can understand the situation better. For now, I want her life to be stable, predictable, safe." "I'll convey that to his representatives," Elena promised. "Now there's one more matter we should discuss." She pulled out a final document. "This is interesting. Our forensic accountant finally unraveled the full structure of the Phoenix Rising Trust. It's quite elaborate." "Elaborate how?" "The trust wasn't created 3 years ago as we initially thought. It was established 5 years ago, well before you and Wesley even met. Originally it was called the Hammond Legacy Trust, with completely different terms. He renamed it and restructured it 2 years into your marriage. changing the beneficiary from himself to the firstborn child of Wesley Hammond. Dahlia frowned, trying to process this information. Why would he do that? That's where it gets interesting, Eleanor continued. The restructuring happened 3 days after he learned you were pregnant. And the terms of the new trust are extraordinarily favorable to the beneficiary, meaning Evelyn. There are no conditions allowing him to reclaim control once released from prison, no provisions for the assets to revert to him under any circumstances. I don't understand. That doesn't sound like Wesley at all. I agree, Eleanor said, which is why I had our people dig deeper. They found this. She produced a copy of an email Wesley had sent to his attorney the day after the trust restructuring. Restructure complete. Now Hammond blood will control the island property, regardless of what happens with the SEC situation. If they come after me personally, this asset remains protected for my heir. So it wasn't about providing for our child, Dahlia concluded. It was about keeping the property in the Hammond family name, protected from his creditors or the government. Essentially, yes. But in restructuring it the way he did, he inadvertently created an irrevocable trust that truly benefits Evelyn, regardless of his original motivations. It's one of the best examples I've seen of someone's manipulative plan backfiring completely. Dahlia couldn't help but laugh. He tried to use our child as a shield for his assets, and instead created the foundation for her financial independence from him. That's, she searched for the right word, poetic. Indeed, Elena agreed with a rare smile, poetic justice. After Elena departed with the signed documents, Dahlia took Evelyn from her crib and walked down to the private beach below the house. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting golden light across the protected cove. Dahlia held her daughter's hands as Evelyn practiced standing in the soft sand, her little legs wobbling with the effort. This is yours, Dahlia told her. Not because your father tried to use you as a financial shield, but because sometimes life has a way of transforming deception into unexpected gifts. As if understanding the significance of the moment, Evelyn took her first independent step, then another, before plopping down on the sand with a delighted giggle. Dahlia knelt beside her daughter, tears unexpectedly blurring her vision. In this moment of milestone achievement, in this place that had once symbolized betrayal, she felt the final pieces of her healing lock into place. 2 weeks later, Dahlia sat in her gallery office reviewing the month's sales figures when her assistant knocked on the open door. "There's someone here to see you," Camilla said, her expression suggesting the visitor was unexpected. "He says he's from the Federal Bureau of Prisons?" Dahlia looked up, surprised. "Did he say what it's about?" "Something about a letter. He said you'd understand." Curious and slightly apprehensive, Dahlia agreed to see the visitor. A middle-aged man in a nondescript suit entered, introducing himself as Corrections Counselor Davis from the federal facility where Wesley was incarcerated. "Ms. Pierce, thank you for seeing me," he began, taking the seat she offered. "I'm here regarding a somewhat unusual situation involving inmate Hammond." "Is something wrong?" Dahlia asked, automatically concerned despite herself. "Not wrong exactly," Davis clarified. "Part of my job involves rehabilitation programming and maintaining appropriate communications between inmates and their families. Mr. Hammond has been participating in our accountability and reconciliation program, which encourages inmates to take responsibility for the impact of their crimes on victims and loved ones." "And this involves me how exactly?" Davis reached into his briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope. "As part of the program, Mr. Hammond wrote you a letter. Under our protocols, I've reviewed the contents to ensure they're appropriate and non-manipulative. I'm here because he specifically requested that I deliver it personally, rather than trusting it to the mail." He placed the envelope on the desk between them. It was marked simply Dahlia in Wesley's distinctive handwriting. "You're under no obligation to read it," Davis assured her, "or to respond. I've made that clear to Mr. Hammond as well. This is entirely your choice." Dahlia stared at the envelope, conflicting emotions churning within her. "Is this common? For counselors to hand-deliver inmate letters?" "No," Davis admitted, "but Mr. Hammond has been an exemplary participant in our programs, and the content of the letter, well, it seemed sincere enough to warrant the exception." After the counselor departed, Dahlia sat alone in her office, the unopened letter before her like a time bomb of uncertain emotional impact. Part of her wanted to throw it away unread, to maintain the hard-won peace she'd established in her life. But another part, The curator, who had always searched for authenticity for the story behind the art, was undeniably curious. Finally, after checking that Evelyn was still happily playing with Camilla in the gallery's small break room, Dahlia opened the envelope and began to read. Dahlia, I've written this letter 17 times. The counselors here encourage authenticity and honest reflection. But after a lifetime of strategic communication, I'm not sure I remember how to be simply honest. So I will try again, without calculation or ulterior motive. I am sorry, not for getting caught, not for losing, but for who I was with you, manipulative, controlling, cruel, for seeing your authenticity as something to be exploited rather than valued, for planning to use our child as a financial shield rather than loving her as a father should. The psychiatrist here says I display significant narcissistic traits with sociopathic tendencies, a clinical way of saying I've spent my life using people as pieces in my personal chess game. You were supposed to be just another piece, the perfect wife who completed my successful image while I built exit strategies with other women, other identities, other possibilities. But you were never just a piece, were you? Even from the beginning, you saw things in art, in life, in people, that I missed entirely. You recognized beauty in imperfection while I demanded control through false perfection. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that in losing everything, freedom, reputation, company, marriage, I've finally begun to see what actually matters. Too late, obviously. That seems to be my particular tragedy. The counselor who will deliver this letter tells me you've opened your gallery, that you're raising our daughter with the authenticity and warmth that I never appreciated in you. He says you seem strong, centered, whole. I'm glad for that, even as I regret my role in making your path so difficult. I've instructed my remaining legal team, reduced considerably in both size and prestige since my conviction, to cooperate fully with any requests regarding Evelyn's trust. The island property belongs to her, to you both, without reservation or condition. It was perhaps the only good decision I made, though even that began as a selfish calculation. I won't write again unless you indicate you're open to communication. I won't request visitation with Evelyn again until she's old enough to have a voice in the decision. These aren't negotiating tactics. They're the bare minimum of respect that I failed to show you during our marriage. The man you married doesn't exist anymore. Perhaps he never did. But the man writing this letter, sitting in a federal prison cell with nothing left but time to reflect, finally understands what he lost when he lost you. Wesley Dahlia set the letter down, her hand trembling slightly. Of all the possible messages she might have expected, this raw, seemingly genuine admission of fault hadn't been among them. Wesley Hammond admitting weakness, acknowledging fault, expressing regret without apparent strategy. It was so out of character that her first instinct was to search for the manipulation hidden between the lines. But as she reread the letter, she couldn't detect the calculated persuasion that had characterized their entire relationship. Perhaps prison had indeed changed him, or perhaps, with nothing left to gain, he had finally found the courage to be honest. She slipped the letter back into its envelope, then placed it in her desk drawer without making an immediate decision about how or whether to respond. Whatever Wesley Hammond had become in prison, whatever genuine regret he might feel, her focus remained on the future she was building, not the past he had shattered. Later that evening, as she sat on the floor of their apartment building block towers with Evelyn, her phone chimed with a notification from the Phoenix Gallery's website contact form. Ms. Pierce, I recently moved to Seattle from New York and discovered your gallery during last month's art walk. The Jennifer Nakamura installation particularly struck me. Her use of negative space as commentary on absence and presence is remarkable. I'm interested in potentially commissioning a piece for my foundation's new headquarters. Would you be available to discuss next week? Regards, Catherine Whitman, Executive Director, the Phoenix Foundation for Survivors of Financial Abuse. Dahlia stared at the message, a slow smile spreading across her face as the name registered. Catherine Whitman, the former wife of Victor Whitman, a hedge fund manager convicted of fraud 5 years earlier. She had not only survived the public scandal, but had established a foundation that provided legal and financial counseling to those affected by similar crimes. This wasn't just a potential commission, it was an opportunity to connect with someone who understood, who had walked a similar path, and emerged not just intact, but purposeful. As Evelyn knocked over the tower they'd built, laughing with delight at the crash. Dahlia felt the perfect symmetry of the moment. Destruction immediately followed by the joy of rebuilding. It was exactly the philosophy that had guided her through the past year, the principle upon which she had named her gallery. "Again?" Evelyn demanded, already reaching for another block. "Yes, sweetheart," Dahlia agreed, setting her phone aside to fully engage with her daughter. "We'll build it again. Better this time." The Phoenix Gallery's first anniversary coincided with Evelyn's first birthday. Dahlia combined the celebrations with an exhibition titled Transformations, featuring works that explored themes of change, resilience, and rebirth. The centerpiece was a commissioned installation by Jennifer Nakamura, a series of delicate paper phoenix sculptures rising from stylized flames, each containing within it a photograph or artifact representing something lost and something gained. The gallery buzzed with activity, art lovers examining the installations, friends celebrating Evelyn's birthday, colleagues congratulating Dahlia on her successful first year. In one corner, Mason, supervised as Evelyn, dressed in a tiny party dress, delightedly smashed her hands into a small cake specially made for her. Among the guests, Dahlia spotted Catherine Whitman, now a friend and important client, deep in conversation with Martin Chen. Nearby, Elena Vasquez chatted with the director of the Seattle Arts Commission. Even Brooke Mercer had sent flowers, though she hadn't attended herself, a thoughtful distance that Dahlia appreciated. As the evening progressed, Dahlia found herself drawn to Nakamura's Phoenix installation. Within each delicate paper sculpture was a small object or image representing a personal transformation. A wedding ring paired with keys to a new home, a hospital bracelet alongside a first artistic creation, a corporate ID badge beside a passport stamped with new adventures. For her own contribution to the installation, Dahlia had chosen to include the small digital recorder she had planted in Wesley's office, the one that had captured his conversation with Brooke about their plans for the vow renewal night, the recording she had never actually listened to but had turned over to federal investigators. Beside it, she had placed Phoenix Gallery's first official sale receipt. "It's powerful," said Catherine, joining her before the installation. "Using the instruments of your past pain as literal building blocks for your new beginning." Dahlia nodded. "That's exactly what Jennifer and I discussed when conceptualizing the piece. Not erasing the past, but transforming it, incorporating it into something new and meaningful." "Have you heard from him?" Catherine asked gently. She alone understood the complex emotions involved, having navigated her own path forward after her ex-husband's downfall. "A letter about 6 months ago," Dahlia admitted, seemingly genuine regret. "I haven't responded." "And you don't have to," Catherine assured her. "Your journey is your own." "I know," Dahlia agreed. "But lately I've been thinking, not about forgiveness exactly, but about closure, about finding a way to acknowledge what happened without letting it define my future or Evelyn's." "And have you found that way?" Dahlia's gaze drifted to where Evelyn sat in Mason's lap, her face and hands smeared with cake frosting, her delighted giggles carrying across the gallery. "I think I have. It's watching my daughter grow without the shadow of his deception darkening her childhood. It's creating this space where transformation isn't just an artistic concept, but a lived reality." She gestured around the gallery, at the clients examining artwork, at the artists proudly discussing their pieces, at the community that had formed around her vision. "This is my response to everything Wesley did. Not bitterness or perpetual victimhood, but creation, building something authentic from the wreckage of his lies." Catherine raised her champagne glass. "To the Phoenix, then, and to women who refuse to be defined by the men who betrayed them." "Saluted to the Phoenix," Dahlia agreed, touching her glass to Catherine's, "and to transforming deception into something beautiful." Later that night, after the guests had departed and Evelyn slept peacefully in her crib, Dahlia stood on the balcony of their new Capitol Hill apartment, watching the Seattle skyline glitter against the night sky. The Hammond Tower still dominated the downtown landscape, though it now bore a different corporate name following the company's bankruptcy and restructuring. Wesley's letter sat on the small table beside her, reread one final time before she made her decision. After careful consideration, she had drafted a brief response, not filled with recriminations or lingering anger, but a simple acknowledgement of his words and a clear statement of boundaries. "Wesley, I received your letter. While I appreciate what appears to be genuine reflection, I want to be clear. Our marriage is over, and my focus is on raising Evelyn and building my own life. For Evelyn's sake, I won't prevent her from knowing you when she's old enough to make that choice for herself. Until then, I ask that you respect my decision to provide her with stability and positivity. I am neither defined by what you did, nor consumed by anger about it. That may be difficult for you to understand, but it's the truth. The woman you married, the one you thought you could control and manipulate, has transformed into someone stronger, clearer, and more authentic. You wrote that you've lost everything. I don't see it that way. I've found everything that matters: purpose, integrity, joy in watching our daughter grow. Perhaps someday you'll understand that true wealth has nothing to do with offshore accounts or escape plans. I wish you growth in your continued journey of self-reflection. Dahlia. She folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope. Tomorrow she would mail it, not as an invitation to ongoing communication, but as the final period at the end of that chapter of her life. The night breeze carried the scent of late summer flowers from the small container garden she had planted on the balcony, hardy blooms that thrived in Seattle's temperamental climate. Among them, just beginning to unfurl its colorful petals, was a dahlia plant, the flower her parents had named her after, known for its complexity, resilience, and striking beauty. Like its namesake, Dahlia Pierce had emerged from the shadow of deception to bloom more vibrantly than before, transformed but undiminished by the storm that had nearly destroyed her. In losing what she thought she wanted, she had discovered what she truly needed: her own strength, her authentic voice, and the pure, uncomplicated love she shared with her daughter. As she closed the balcony door and went to check on Evelyn one last time before sleep, Dahlia felt not the absence of what had been lost, but the presence of all that had been gained. The deception that had nearly broken her had ultimately revealed her true self, not the carefully curated corporate wife or the hesitant, silenced partner, but a woman of determination, creativity, and remarkable resilience. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Dahlia watched her daughter's peaceful breathing. Evelyn had her father's striking blue eyes, but thankfully Dahlia's temperament, curious, joyful, and genuinely empathetic, even at her young age. Whatever genetic legacy Wesley had contributed, it was being shaped by a very different set of values than his own. "We're going to be okay," Dahlia whispered, echoing the promise she had made on that fateful night in the hotel suite, when her world had simultaneously collapsed and reformed into something truer. She thought back to the opening night of her gallery, to her conversation with Brooke, to the surprising peace she had found in confronting that painful piece of her past. The Phoenix Gallery's success wasn't just professional vindication, it was personal transformation, manifested in physical space, in community, in purpose. The forensic accounting team had eventually uncovered most of Wesley's hidden assets, revealing a complex web of offshore accounts and shell companies designed to protect his wealth from both the government and from her in case of divorce. But his most sophisticated scheme, the Phoenix Rising Trust with its valuable Orcas Island property, had become the foundation of Dahlia's new life with Evelyn, a perfect inversion of his intentions. She had kept the trust's name when establishing her gallery, finding poetic symmetry in reclaiming the phoenix as her own symbol. What Wesley had intended as his secret survival mechanism had instead fueled her rebirth. The man who prided himself on strategic thinking had inadvertently created the perfect conditions for her transformation. The gallery was flourishing, establishing Dahlia as a significant voice in Seattle's contemporary art scene. The connections she had rebuilt, with Martin, with former colleagues, with artists she had championed years ago, had blossomed into a vibrant professional network. Her curatorial vision, temporarily buried during her marriage, had re-emerged stronger and more defined. As she prepared for bed that night, Dahlia recalled something her grandmother had once told her: "Sometimes the universe hands you exactly the crisis you need to become who you're meant to be." At the time, as a confident young curator mapping out her career, she had nodded politely without really understanding. Now, having weathered betrayal, public humiliation, divorce, and single motherhood, and emerged not just intact but flourishing, she recognized the profound truth in those words. Wesley Hammond had entered her life like a storm, powerful and destructive. But in the aftermath, in the silence following the tempest, Dahlia had discovered her own strength, not as his wife, not as a victim of his schemes, but as herself, gallery owner, mother, Phoenix Rising. Across town in the sterile visiting room of the Federal Detention Center, Brooke Mercer sat across from Wesley Hammond, separated by a glass partition. It was her first visit since the trial, arranged at his persistent request through his attorney. "You look good," he said, his voice tinny through the intercom system. The orange jumpsuit contrasted sharply with his still handsome face, though new lines had formed around his eyes, and his once perfect hair had thinned slightly at the temples. "What do you want, Wesley?" Brooke asked, ignoring the compliment. "Your attorney was very persistent." "I wanted to see you," he replied, studying her face, "to understand why you turned on me so completely. We had plans, Brooke, a future together." She laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "Plans? You mean your plans, which involved using me just like you used everyone else? I was never your partner, Wesley. I was just another asset in your portfolio." "That's not true," he insisted, leaning forward. "What we had was real." "Was it?" she challenged. "Then explain the documents the FBI found in your offshore accounts, the ones setting up a new identity for you. Just you, not us. In Costa Rica. The emergency exit strategy that didn't include me." Wesley's expression faltered momentarily before his mask of control slipped back into place. "A contingency only. You know how I operate. Multiple options, backup plans for the backup plans." "Yes, I do know how you operate," Brooke agreed coldly. "That's why I cooperated with the prosecution. Because I finally saw clearly what you've always been, a man who sees people as either tools or obstacles." She stood, gathering her purse. "I didn't come here for closure or reconciliation, Wesley. I came to see for myself what I almost sacrificed everything for, and now I have." "Wait," he said quickly, pressing his hand against the glass. "Have you seen her? Dahlia? Or—" He hesitated. "My daughter." Brooke paused, considering how much to share. "I saw them both at the gallery opening. Your daughter is beautiful, Wesley. She has your eyes, but thankfully seems to have inherited Dahlia's heart." "And Dahlia? How is she?" "Flourishing," Brooke replied simply. "She's built something genuine and meaningful from the wreckage you left behind. Something you could never create with all your strategic planning and manipulation." As she turned to leave, Brooke added, "You know what's ironic? In trying to control everyone and everything around you, you lost the only things that might have genuinely mattered: a wife who actually loved you, a child who would have looked up to you, a legacy beyond money and power." She nodded to the guard to indicate she was finished. "Goodbye, Wesley. I won't be visiting again." After Brooke departed, Wesley remained seated, staring at his reflection in the glass partition. The man who looked back at him, still calculating, still searching for angles and advantages, suddenly seemed like a stranger. For the first time since his arrest, a question formed in his mind that wasn't about strategy or survival or manipulation. What if I had simply loved them? What if that had been enough? The question had no strategic value, offered no path to reduced sentencing or asset recovery. Yet it lingered, echoing in the emptiness of his prison existence, a haunting glimpse of a road not taken. On the anniversary of the Phoenix Gallery's opening, as Seattle's autumn painted the city in brilliant reds and golds, Dahlia stood in the center of her thriving business, watching as clients and artists mingled among new installations. Evelyn, now a precocious toddler with boundless energy, charmed everyone she encountered as she weaved between legs with toy in hand, closely supervised by Mason. The past year had brought continued success, critical acclaim, financial stability, and a growing reputation as one of the Northwest's most insightful curators of contemporary art. Dahlia had expanded the gallery's programming to include community art classes, exhibitions featuring emerging artists, and partnerships with local schools. The Phoenix had become not just a commercial space, but a cultural hub. As she greeted guests and discussed artwork, Dahlia caught sight of a familiar face entering the gallery, Catherine Whitman, founder of the Phoenix Foundation. They had met 6 months earlier when Catherine had commissioned a piece for her foundation's headquarters, and their professional relationship had quickly evolved into friendship built on shared experience. "Congratulations on a remarkable first year," Catherine said, embracing Dahlia warmly. "The Transformations exhibition is inspired." "Thank you for coming," Dahlia replied, "and for your continued support." Catherine glanced around the gallery, taking in the vibrant energy of the space. "You know, when Victor was sentenced, everyone told me I'd never recover. Professionally, financially, emotionally, that his shadow would define me forever. But it didn't," Dahlia observed. No, it became the catalyst for something far more meaningful than being Mrs. Victor Whitman ever was. Catherine smiled as Evelyn toddled past, giving chase to her Uncle Mason. Building something authentic from the wreckage is the best revenge, isn't it? Dahlia considered this, watching her daughter's joyful exploration of the world. I don't think of it as revenge anymore, she said thoughtfully. That implies I'm still reacting to Wesley, still defining myself in opposition to him. What do you call it then? Liberation, Dahlia decided. From expectations, from compromises that dimmed my light, from a life built on appearances rather than authenticity. As the evening progressed and guests began to depart, Dahlia found herself alone in the gallery's small courtyard garden, enjoying a moment of quiet reflection. The sculpture garden featured a central piece she had commissioned from a young artist, a phoenix crafted from copper wire and glass, catching the light from all angles, simultaneously delicate and indestructible. Mason joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. To the phoenix, he toasted, and to my remarkable sister. To family, she countered, clinking her glass against his. The real kind, built on love and support, rather than obligation or appearance. As they stood together in comfortable silence, Dahlia felt a profound sense of completion. The journey from that rainy Seattle gallery opening, where she had first sensed something wrong in her marriage, to this moment of authentic success and joy, had been brutal at times. But standing here now, watching the light play through the phoenix sculpture as her daughter's laughter echoed from inside, she wouldn't change a moment of it. The deception that had nearly destroyed her had ultimately revealed her true self, not as Wesley Hammond's wife, not as a victim of his schemes, but as Dahlia Pierce, gallery owner, curator, mother, survivor. In losing what she thought she wanted, she had discovered what she truly needed. And in that discovery lay not just healing but triumph. "Mommy, can I have the blue one, please?" 6-year-old Evelyn Pierce bounced on her toes beside a display of hand-blown glass paperweights, her cerulean eyes, so like her father's, wide with fascination. "Careful, sweetheart," Dahlia cautioned, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "These are artworks, not toys." "I know," Evelyn replied with the solemnity of a child accustomed to gallery spaces. "I'll keep it on my desk for my drawings, like a real artist." Dahlia smiled, recognizing her own early passion for beautiful objects in her daughter's expression. "We'll talk about it for your birthday next month." The Phoenix Gallery had expanded significantly over the past 5 years, now occupying a renovated brick building in Capitol Hill, with 3 exhibition spaces and a sculpture garden. What had begun as Dahlia's act of reclamation had evolved into one of Seattle's most respected contemporary art venues, known for discovering emerging talents and fostering innovative installations. Ms. Pierce, her assistant, Camilla, now the gallery's associate director, approached with a tablet in hand. The Miyazaki installation is confirmed for the winter showcase, and the Times critic wants to schedule an interview about the expansion to Portland. "Wonderful," Dahlia replied. "Let's set that up for next week after Evelyn's school performance." At 37, Dahlia had grown into her success with a quiet confidence that commanded respect throughout the Seattle arts community. The caramel hair that once fell in careful waves now framed her face in a sophisticated bob streaked with natural highlights, and her wardrobe of minimalist architectural pieces reflected her refined aesthetic sensibilities. "Mom?" Evelyn interrupted, her attention caught by something beyond the gallery windows. "Who's that man taking pictures of our building?" Dahlia looked up, following her daughter's gaze to the street, where a tall figure stood partially obscured by an umbrella, apparently photographing the gallery facade. Something about his posture, the straight shoulders, the calculated stillness, sent a flicker of recognition through her before he turned and walked away. "Probably just a tourist, honey," she said, though an unsettled feeling lingered. "Let's finish reviewing the new acquisitions before we meet Uncle Mason for dinner." Later that evening, after Evelyn had been tucked into bed in their spacious apartment above the gallery, Dahlia's phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "The Phoenix has flourished beautifully, as have you. We should talk. W." She stared at the message, her heart accelerating despite her best efforts at composure. 5 years had passed since she had last communicated with Wesley. 5 years during which she had built a meaningful life that owed nothing to his influence. Now, with 6 words, he had disrupted her carefully constructed peace. The notification of his parole had come 3 weeks earlier, a formal letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons indicating that Wesley Hammond had served 6 years of his 18-year sentence and qualified for early release due to exemplary behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. Dahlia had filed the notice away, refusing to let it occupy her thoughts. Yet here he was, already back in Seattle, already finding ways to insinuate himself into her awareness. She considered ignoring the message, blocking the number, maintaining the emotional boundaries she had established. Instead, surprising herself, she typed a response. "I have nothing to say to you. Do not contact Evelyn or me again." The reply came almost immediately. 5 minutes. The Elm Street Bakery tomorrow, 10 a.m. Then I'll disappear if that's what you want. You deserve the choice. The Elm Street Bakery, her old neighborhood haunt from before their marriage, the place where she and Mason used to dissect terrible gallery art over maple scones and coffee. Wesley's choice of location wasn't accidental. Nothing he did ever was. After a long internal debate, Dahlia responded, "Fine, 5 minutes. Alone." The bakery had changed little in the intervening years. The same mismatched chairs, the same chalkboard menu, the same scent of cinnamon and coffee in the air. Dahlia arrived precisely at 10, selecting a table near the window where she could see anyone approaching. At 10:03, Wesley Hammond entered, and Dahlia's breath caught despite her preparation. Prison had changed him physically. He was leaner, his once perfect hair now silver at the temples, fine lines etched around his eyes. Yet he still carried himself with the same measured confidence, dressed in a simple but clearly expensive charcoal sweater and slacks that suggested he had already begun rebuilding his external image. He spotted her immediately, crossing to her table with the deliberate movements of someone who had spent years in environments where sudden motions could be dangerous. "Dahlia," he said, her name carrying a weight of unspoken history. "Thank you for coming." 3 minutes, she replied, glancing pointedly at her watch. "You've already used 2 walking in and sitting down." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Still direct. I've always admired that about you, even when it was inconvenient for my plans." "What do you want, Wesley?" The calmness in her voice surprised even her. He studied her face for a moment before answering. "To see you. To apologize in person, not through prison-monitored letters. To let you know that I understand now what I destroyed." "You understand?" The words held a sharp edge. 6 years in a minimum security federal prison, and suddenly you comprehend the magnitude of your betrayal. "No," he admitted, his candor unexpected. "I don't claim to fully understand it, but I've had 6 years with nothing but time to reflect on the choices I made. The man I was when we married was..." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "He was hollow, constructed entirely of ambition and appearance." Dahlia remained silent, unwilling to make this easier for him. "I've seen the gallery," he continued. "Read about your success. You've built something remarkable, Dahlia, something genuine in a way Hammond Developments never was." "If you came here for absolution, you're wasting both our time," she said, gathering her purse. "Your 5 minutes are up." "I came to tell you I'm leaving Seattle," he said quickly. "I've accepted a position with a development firm in Austin. I won't intrude on the life you've built here." This gave her pause. "And Evelyn? I'd like to meet her someday when you think it's appropriate, but on your terms, not mine." He placed an envelope on the table between them. "This contains legal documents relinquishing all claims to visitation rights unless specifically granted by you. My attorney can explain the details if you wish." Dahlia stared at the envelope, genuine surprise displacing her practiced composure. Of all the scenarios she had anticipated, Wesley Hammond voluntarily surrendering his parental rights had not been among them. "Why would you do this?" she asked, suspicion coloring her tone. "Because control was always my currency," he replied with unexpected self-awareness. "My weapon. The only way I can demonstrate that I've changed, even slightly, is by relinquishing that control where it matters most." He stood, adjusting his sweater with that familiar gesture that once signaled the conclusion of a business negotiation. "I won't contact you again unless you initiate it. The choice is yours, as it always should have been." As he turned to leave, Dahlia found herself saying, "Wesley, one question." He paused, waiting. "Was any of it real? Us, I mean. Was there ever a moment when you weren't calculating, manipulating, planning exit strategies?" The question hung between them, laden with 6 years of unspoken history. "Yes," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "The morning after our wedding, you were sketching the view from our hotel balcony in Santorini, completely absorbed, hair blowing in the wind. I watched you and thought, this woman sees beauty everywhere. And for a moment, just one moment, I wanted to see the world through your eyes instead of mine." Without waiting for her response, he walked out of the bakery, leaving Dahlia with an envelope of legal documents and an unexpected glimpse into a truth she had long ago stopped seeking. "He's back in Seattle?" Mason asked that evening, his protective instincts immediately engaged as they sat on Dahlia's balcony after Evelyn had gone to bed. "For how long?" "Just temporarily, apparently," Dahlia replied, turning the wineglass in her hands. "He's moving to Austin for a job." Mason studied his sister's face in the soft evening light. "How do you feel about seeing him?" "Strangely, nothing," she admitted. "Not anger, not fear, not even satisfaction at seeing him diminished. Just nothing." "That's called healing, Dahl," he observed. 6 years ago, the mere mention of his name could send you into a panic attack." She nodded, considering this. "It's more than that, though. Seeing him today, I realized something important. I won. Not just survived, but won." "Of course you did. The gallery is thriving. Evelyn is amazing. You're—" "No," she interrupted. "I mean, I won on a level Wesley would understand. The level that would matter most to him." She reached for a folder on the side table, handing it to Mason. "Remember how devastated I was when I discovered the Phoenix Rising Trust wasn't created out of love for our child, but as a financial shelter for Wesley's assets? Hard to forget. You cried for hours, then got coldly strategic in a way that honestly scared me a little. That was the turning point," Dahlia explained, "when I stopped being reactive and started being proactive. These documents show what I've built since then." Mason opened the folder, scanning the contents with growing amazement. "The Phoenix Arts Foundation, property holdings in 3 states, investment portfolios. Dahl, this is a financial and cultural legacy that will long outlast Hammond Developments," she finished. "Built from the seed of that one property, Wesley thought he was cleverly hiding from the feds." Understanding dawned in Mason's expression. "You used his own tactics against him." "With one crucial difference," Dahlia clarified. "Everything I've built is legitimate, transparent, built on actual value rather than financial sleight of hand." "Does he know?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "He's seen the gallery, probably read about our expansion to Portland, but the foundation, the property holdings, the investment structures designed to benefit art education for generations to come? No, those details aren't public. So the ultimate revenge is that he'll never know the full extent of what you've accomplished using his playbook, but with integrity." "It's not revenge anymore," Dahlia corrected him, gazing out at Seattle's skyline, where the former Hammond Tower stood renamed and rebranded. "It's transcendence. I'm not defined by what he did to me or even by my response to it. I've created something that will flourish long after both of us are gone." She took a sip of wine, savoring the moment of complete clarity. "What began as my desperate attempt to rebuild has become something far more significant than anything Wesley ever created. And the best part, I no longer need him to know that." "Mommy?" Evelyn's voice broke through the morning quiet as Dahlia prepared breakfast in their sun-filled kitchen. "Is my daddy a bad person?" The question Dahlia had been anticipating for years still caught her unprepared. She turned to find her daughter standing in the doorway, a school assignment visible in her small hands. "My family tree." "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Dahlia replied, buying time as she gestured for Evelyn to join her at the table. "Mia Johnson said her mum told her my daddy went to jail for stealing money," Evelyn stated matter-of-factly, "and that's why we don't see him." "Is that true?" Dahlia took a deep breath, remembering her promise to herself that she would always be truthful with her daughter, just never cruel. "Yes, that part is true. Your father made some bad choices with money that broke the law, and he had to go to jail for those choices." "But is he a bad person?" Evelyn persisted, her clear blue eyes, Wesley's eyes, focused intently on her mother's face. "People aren't simply good or bad, Evie," Dahlia said carefully. "We all make choices, some good and some bad. Your father made some very bad choices, but that doesn't mean everything about him is bad. Do I look like him?" The question held innocent curiosity rather than concern. "You have his eyes," Dahlia acknowledged with a smile. "Beautiful blue eyes that see the world so clearly. And maybe his determination. You never give up when something is important to you. Evelyn considered this information seriously. Will I ever meet him? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications for their future. Dahlia thought of the envelope Wesley had given her, still unopened in her desk drawer, of his promise to respect her boundaries, of the glimpse of genuine regret she had seen in his eyes at the bakery. Someday if you want to, she finally answered, when you're older and can understand more about complicated grown-up situations, and only if you choose to. Evelyn nodded, apparently satisfied with this answer. Can I put his name on my family tree? The teacher said we should include everyone, even if we don't see them. Yes, Dahlia agreed. His name is Wesley Hammond. He's part of your history, even if he's not part of our daily life. As she helped Evelyn complete her assignment, Dahlia marveled at her daughter's straightforward acceptance of complicated truths. There would be more questions as she grew older, more nuanced conversations about betrayal and redemption, about the consequences of choices, about forgiveness and boundaries. But for now, this simple acknowledgement that Wesley existed, that he was connected to them by blood if not by presence, seemed sufficient. The following week, as autumn painted Seattle in vibrant colors reminiscent of that fateful gallery opening nearly 7 years earlier, Dahlia received a small package at the gallery. Inside was a first-edition copy of a rare art history text she had once mentioned admiring during their courtship, with a simple note, "For Evelyn's education fund, no strings attached." Tucked inside the book was a cashier's check for an amount that, while substantial, represented only a fraction of what Wesley had once controlled. The gesture was restrained, almost humble, so unlike the grandiose manipulations that had characterized their marriage. After careful consideration, Dahlia deposited the check into a separate educational trust she established for Evelyn, distinct from the larger Phoenix Foundation assets. It was neither acceptance nor forgiveness, but rather a pragmatic acknowledgement that Evelyn deserved whatever benefits might come from her father's belated attempt at responsibility. That evening, she took Evelyn to the Olympic Sculpture Park, the site where she and Wesley had renewed their vows in that elaborate deception years ago. The memory no longer stung. It had been incorporated into the larger tapestry of experiences that had shaped her into the woman she had become. As they walked among the sculptures, Evelyn running ahead with the boundless energy of childhood, Dahlia paused at a viewpoint overlooking Elliott Bay. The same waters, the same mountains, the same city skyline that had witnessed her deepest humiliation now framed her greatest triumph. "Look, Mommy," Evelyn called, pointing to a new installation, a series of mirrored panels that captured and reflected the surroundings, transforming everyday scenes into kaleidoscopic art. "It's making everything beautiful in a different way." "Yes," Dahlia agreed, watching her daughter's delight with a full heart. Sometimes seeing things differently is the greatest art of all. In that moment, with Seattle spread before her and her daughter's laughter carrying on the autumn breeze, Dahlia Pierce finally understood the complete arc of her journey. What had begun in deception, Wesley's calculated manipulation, her own willful blindness, had blossomed into a life of authentic beauty and purpose. The gallery that had once been a desperate act of reclamation was now a thriving cultural institution. The daughter who might have been collateral damage in Wesley's schemes was now a joyful, secure child with limitless potential, and Dahlia herself had transformed from the perfect corporate wife into a woman who defined success on her own terms, not in opposition to Wesley Hammond's betrayal, but as an expression of her deepest values. As the setting sun cast golden light across the water, Dahlia recognized that the final piece of her healing wasn't forgiveness of Wesley, but gratitude for the painful catalyst that had set her on this path. In attempting to destroy her through deception, he had inadvertently revealed her true strength and set her free to create something far more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. The phoenix had risen, not just once in a dramatic moment of crisis, but continually in daily choices to create rather than destroy, to build rather than scheme, to love authentically rather than manipulate strategically. And in that ongoing emergence, Dahlia had discovered the most profound truth of all, that from the ashes of betrayal can bloom not just survival, but transcendence. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.